Chapter 1077. 2 months after the experts left the capital, Renbaqian and the Empress finally moved into the new palace in the capital. Subsequently, the 6 departments also moved in. With the relocation of these departments, the capital became a veritable imperial capital, the political and economic center of Dayo. The docks and railway tracks next to the capital also made it one of the most important commodity distribution centers. The migration of hundreds of thousands of people, the migration of court officials, and the merchants who had heard the news made the capital prosperous in a short period of time. Of course, the opposite of prosperity was the conflict between the ethnic groups. There were conflicts between the Aboriginals, the Jing tribe, and the people of the Yun nation. Even though the Empress punished them severely, it would still take some time for the reckless and upright Aboriginals to settle down. However, Renbaqian didn't pay much attention to this matter as there were too many things he needed to pay attention to. For example, the 2 groups of experts who were sent out. For example, the various products from the Department of Commerce. For example, the 2 primary schools and 1 night school that were being prepared. For example, the planned foot massage and healthcare street. Cough, he hadn't had the chance to go there yet. Your Highness, these have appeared on the market recently. Zhu Zhuo from the Department of Commerce placed a few things in front of Renbaqian. There were 2 glasses, 3 kinds of toothpaste, a bottle of perfume, a pair of sunglasses, and a packet of salt. Renbaqian knew at a glance that these things weren't sold by the Department of Commerce. The glasses looked similar, but the color was slightly green compared to the ones he sold, and he could see the presence of bubbles. As for toothpaste, the Department of Commerce sold teeth-cleansing toothpaste, and these 3 types were teeth-cleansing toothpaste, teeth-cleansing toothpaste, and teeth-cleansing toothpaste. Renbaqian looked at them strangely and almost laughed. He didn't expect that there would be a situation like Kong Shuai's instant noodles in this world. Sure enough, no matter which world one was in, unscrupulous merchants were the same. Renbaqian wasn't surprised by the leakage of technology and imitations. Including the glass, the technical content of these things wasn't high. Even if it was glass, there would always be a way to find out the production method after selling it for so many years. The people of the Yun nation are very bold, Zhu Zhuo commented. It's not that they are bold, but that someone made them bold. Renbaqian laughed. For example, although the production method wasn't completely confidential, it wasn't easy for the people of the Yun nation to obtain it. Even if they could do it, they wouldn't dare to do it. As for who the people backing them up were, in any case, those big shots in the imperial court could not escape. Ever since he opened the door and allowed the government and merchants to collude together, this kind of abnormal combination of interests would definitely develop and grow. But it didn't matter. He had already released the method of making soap and the like. What the imperial court needed to do was to guide the development of the market and open up new markets, not monopolize every commodity. And the interest groups that colluded with the government and the businessmen got the best ticket. It was better to imitate things that he didn't care about and use them as the blood of this aberration to develop. It was better than colluding with officials and businessmen to come up with some crooked ways. Up until now, those people still had a sense of propriety, if they didn't look at those pirated brands. However, there were 2 things that absolutely could not be touched: salt and iron. These were monopolized by the state, and could be said to be one of the biggest sources of taxes for the state. Renbaqian picked up the packet of salt and twirled it between his fingers. It was a little rough. Where did you get it from? Renbaqian asked softly. He believed that no one would dare to sell this thing to Lan City or the capital. Recently, a lot of this salt has entered the market in some small and medium-sized cities and villages in the Yun nation. The price is 50% cheaper than ordinary salt. Renbaqian nodded slightly. The price was 50% cheaper than ordinary salt, so ordinary people who weren't rich naturally liked it. However, this thing wasn't something that anyone could get their hands on. Anyone who touched it would die. Got it, I will get someone to check. You have done a good job. As for the other things, let them sell them. After that, we will gradually reduce or even close down the toothbrush, toothpaste, soap, perfume, and glass factories to develop other projects, Renbachyan said. The glass factory is also going to be reduced. Zhu Zhuo was a little surprised since the profits of the glass factory weren't low. Reduce it by half. Renbachyan naturally knew that the glass factory could still bring in a lot of profits, but he really didn't have that much manpower on hand. The business was getting bigger and the manpower was getting more and more scarce. In any case, he had already made the most money. Now that someone had successfully imitated it, more imitations would soon appear on the market. Instead of competing with them, he might as well reduce the number of glass factories and only keep some factories with the highest profits, such as silver mirrors, or some factories that produced cans. The manpower from other factories would be transferred to participate in other projects. Even though the glass factory was owned by the royal family, the Ministry of Work still owned 30% of the profits. He had to inform Tong Zhinya about the reduction of the glass factory. By the way, you don't have to shut down the glass factory in Cliff City, Renbachyan reminded. Cliff City was by the sea and was one of the 3 major estuaries of the Yun nation. At present, Renbachyan was asking someone to calculate the situation of the seafood in the East Sea. He was preparing to make these seafood into canned food. Especially things like kelp and seaweed, which were produced in large quantities and were cheap. They could replace vegetables and were rich in nutrients, which was the best. In his vision, the canned fish would be sold to the Yun nation, and the canned aquatic plants would be sold to the mainland of Dayo. Understood, my lord. Zhu Zhuo was an overseas returnee who took the initiative to seek refuge with Renbachyan. He would support all of Renbachyan's decisions and would at most raise some of his doubts. Regardless of whether Renbachyan answered or not, he would resolutely carry them out. After dealing with the matters of the Department of Commerce, he summoned an official from the Department of Education to inquire about elementary schools and supper. There were 2 primary schools, one for Aboriginal youths, and the other for Jing tribe and Yun nation youths. In addition to the construction of the campus, there was also the problem of teachers. Although there were intelligent robots, some teachers were also needed. Renbachyan already had plans for these teachers. They were the students who would graduate from the high school department at the end of the year. Half of these students came from ordinary families, and it was estimated that most of them would enter various departments. The teachers would be selected from this group of students. In addition to the construction of the campus and teachers, the most important issue was how to get the commoners to send their children to elementary schools. One had to know that not everyone in this world would eagerly send their children to schools when they saw the enrollment. For most people, schools weren't their goal. Even if they didn't have any tuition fees. For ordinary people, literacy wasn't the first choice. This was the case even in some poor places in China a few years ago. Parents were more willing to let their children do housework within their abilities to reduce the burden of the adults. When they were older, they would go out to work early to reduce the pressure on the family. Although this world was different, there wasn't much of a difference. If their aptitude was good, they would rather let their children practice martial arts or learn how to hunt. This was the case in Lon City in the past. With the development of the school and the emergence of various new products in recent years, the thoughts of the commoners in Lon City had changed a little. However, the Aboriginals in the capital had all moved out from the 60,000 mountains and didn't have any concept of going to school. Knowledge could change one's fate. That was nonsense. Fists were the hard truth. Therefore, Renbachyan had to put in a lot of effort to get them to send their children to school. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 1078. 2 months later, Renbachyan finally took the time to experience the brothels in the capital. The brothels in the capital were much larger than those in Lon City. Lawn City only had the 4 major courtyards, but the brothels in the capital had many chambers of commerce from the Yun nation. The atmosphere was completely different from that of the 4 major courtyards, and it naturally attracted many Aboriginal officials and children of officials. After all, many people liked new things. Furthermore, the 4 major courtyards had already stopped doing prostitution under the order of the Empress, and the girls there could say, "I sell my body, not my skills." Wrong, they sold their skills, not their bodies. The brothels in the capital sold both their skills and their bodies. Renbochin had heard about it several times and couldn't help but be tempted. He didn't do anything and just went to take a look. He made an appointment with Tong Jinye and a few officials from the Ministry of Works. Although his relationship with the other ministers of the 6 ministries was much better, it was still the most convenient to go with Tong Jinye when it came to prostitution. The friendship that came from this wasn't something that others could compare to. Moreover, he could take the blame at critical moments. The brothel street was called Zhangtai Street, which was located on the 3rd Ring Road. Renbochin walked on it with 2 guards. It was a little early at this time, so there weren't many people on the street. Both sides of the street were different from other places. There were courtyards with peach and willow trees planted in the courtyards with their branches poking out of the walls. The windows of the pavilions in the courtyards were open, and the laughter of young girls could be heard from time to time, accompanied by stringed bamboo music. "Your Highness, we have arrived," the leader of the guards, Shi, said to Renbochin. Renbochin looked up and saw the words Fengming Court hanging above the courtyard gate. "Have you been here before?" Renbochin felt that Shi seemed very familiar. Shi had a straightforward smile on his face. Renbochin shook his head slightly. This bunch of guys with thick eyebrows and big eyes. None of them were good people. "Lead the way." Renbochin snorted. The 3 of them were dressed casually, and Renbochin was wearing a coffee-colored silk robe. This kind of expensive clothing wasn't rare in the Yun nation. Many important family members and wealthy merchants wore this kind of clothing. However, only officials or children of officials would wear this kind of clothing here, and they would have a strong family background. "Gentlemen, please come inside. Do you have a lady you like?" Immediately, a manservant welcomed them with a smile like a blooming flower. "Let's take a look." Renbochin's expression didn't change. He had an appointment with Tong Jinye, but it wasn't time yet. He also wanted to see what the brothel in the Yun nation was like. As soon as they entered the main hall, a brothel keeper approached them with a smile. She was about 30 years old and was very charming. She recognized the leader of the 3 at a glance. Renbochin wasn't looking at her. Instead, he was looking at the stage in the middle where an unknown play was being performed. The opera singer didn't have much makeup on her face, but it could be seen that her original appearance was quite outstanding. She had a curvaceous figure and a clear voice. Renbochin took a few glances at it, found a place to sit down, and got someone to serve a pot of wine and dried fruits. He then sat at the side and admired the food. After all, he had never seen such a play before. The most common dance in the palace was the Wild War dance, as well as some dances of the Jing tribe. The most popular dance at the palace banquets was when a few bare-chested big shots competed in the Black Tiger Steel's Heart and the groin-lifting kick. After watching for a long time, it was time for Renbochin to get someone to bring him to the room he had booked. He didn't expect the room to be on the 2nd floor with windows on both the inside and outside. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have had to sit downstairs. Fengming Garden. Where is that place? The Empress snorted after listening to the guard's report. Tong Jinye, that fellow, doesn't learn from his mistakes. Although the Empress always liked to push the blame onto Tong Jinye, this time, it really wasn't her fault. In fact, Renbochin was the one who told the Empress that Tong Jinye had invited him to Fengming Garden for a discussion. After all, he knew that he couldn't hide his whereabouts. Renbocchen first sold out his comrade who went to the brothel with him and threw the blame to Tong Jingye to show that he was innocent. This way, even if the Empress was angry, she wouldn't be angry at him. The most important thing in life was to always leave a backup plan no matter what you did. In any case, it was the habit of the couple to throw the blame to Tong Jingye first. "Your Majesty, do you want to go and take a look?" Qing Yuan tempted him. Now that she was almost 30 years old, she looked much more mature, but her temperament was still the same as before. She liked to join in on the fun. "What's there to see?" The Empress waved her hand. She trusted Renbocchen quite a bit. Usually, Renbocchen didn't have the habit of going to such places. The main thing was that his kidneys weren't good. Even if he had the heart and the guts, he didn't have the strength to do it. Qing Yuan felt a little regretful that she hadn't left the palace for some time. After watching a movie, the Empress heard someone reporting, "Your Majesty, the princess is missing." The Empress rubbed her eyebrows. The palace was much bigger than before, and a small number of guards were left in the palace in Lan City. Now, there was a shortage of guards, and it was getting harder and harder to keep an eye on Erhua. In the past 3 months, this wasn't the first time. "Let's go to the night market and inform the Public Order Bureau to search in the city." Not long after, there was news that the princess was found near Zhangtai Street. Erhua looked at the pedestrians and the courtyards on both sides of the street with an excited expression on his face. Her father wasn't back today, and her mother didn't care about her, so she simply went out for a walk. She originally wanted to go to the night market. She was still concerned about the liveliness of the night market and might be able to see her subordinates. According to her father, more than half of her subordinates had come to the capital. She didn't expect to end up in a place that she had never been to before. However, this place wasn't bad either. There were many people, and the courtyards on the side were beautiful. The environment here was much better than the night market, so she strolled around in peace. Such a beautiful little girl appearing on the street naturally attracted the attention of many people. However, she didn't care. Instead, she curiously looked at everything around her. Finally, she saw the most beautiful courtyard with the most people and walked in. The music coming from inside was very pleasant to the ears. As a result, she was stopped at the door. "Young lady, this isn't a place for you," the manservant in front of the door said with a smile. "Why?" "I want to go in and take a look." Erhua raised an eyebrow. There wasn't a place in the capital that could stop her. "Oh, young lady, don't make things difficult for me. If I let you in, won't I die?" the manservant begged when he saw her barging in. There were many officials in the capital, and this young lady didn't look like a child from an ordinary family. If her family found out that he let her in, wouldn't he be beaten to death? Seeing his begging look, Erhua's heart softened. She stomped her foot and said, "Forget it, I'm not going in." As she spoke, she even rolled her eyes. The manservant felt as if he had been pardoned. Erhua found an empty corner and smiled. "You guys won't let me in, but I'll go in anyway. Let's see what this place is." She flipped over the wall and leaped over. Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 1079. Beside Renbocchen were 2 slender girls who were about 17 or 18 years old. Although they weren't very old, they were extremely beautiful, gentle, and charming. Their every move was seductive. It was no wonder that Fengming Garden had gained such a reputation in the capital in such a short period of time. Besides Renbocchen, there were also Tong Jingye, Feng Ho, Gui Hong, and other officials from the Ministry of Works in the room. All of them were bold and had 1 or 2 girls beside them. Compared to the others, Renbocchen was much more restrained. At most, his hands would occasionally touch the bodies of the 2 girls beside him. He didn't think too much about it. Although domestic flowers weren't as fragrant as wildflowers, the difference between domestic flowers and wildflowers was too great, so he wasn't really interested. At most, his mind was focused on drinking and chatting. While everyone was chatting and laughing, they heard cheers coming from outside the window. Renbachien's ears twitched and heard an extremely familiar voice among the cheers. It couldn't be helped because the voice wasn't soft. Even in the midst of all the noise, he could still distinguish it. Renbachien's expression suddenly became strange. It can't be, right? Renbachien's expression changed slightly. He got up and walked to the window to find the owner of the voice. Young Master Ren, what are you doing instead of drinking? Tong Jingye laughed as he hugged the two girls in his arms. In fact, Tong Jingye, Feng Ho, and Gui Hong were the same. At most, they could touch and hug women, but they couldn't do anything else. These girls from the Yun nation were like the most fragile flowers that couldn't withstand their bodies. Even if they could control their bodies, they couldn't control their essence. Even a Manwell expert couldn't withstand it. Moreover, these girls had only learned some superficial martial arts and weren't even at the Manwell level. What they enjoyed was the gentleness and charm of these girls. It's fine. It's quite lively down there. Renbachien waved his hand and looked down. It didn't take long before he saw a person who definitely shouldn't be here. She was standing on a stool and clapping her hands with a face full of joy. Renbachien's expression immediately turned ugly. Honeysuckle actually came here. A dignified princess actually came to a brothel. If this were to be known by those big mouths behind him, the news would spread throughout the imperial court and become a laughing stock. Renbachien's face was gloomy and uncertain. He was pondering how to avoid being discovered by those big mouths behind him. He wanted to chase Erhua out and deal with her when he got back. Fortunately, Honeysuckle had snuck in, and he was making a big fuss. The people in the brothel noticed him, and a few of them immediately went over to ask. No one knew what the two sides said, but Honeysuckle instantly attacked. He punched a few people who looked like guards and knocked them to the ground. He stood there arrogantly and looked down on the other side. In this aspect, Erhua was very similar to the Empress. If they could use their fists, they would definitely not use their mouths. When faced with a problem, their hands were faster than their brains. Knocking over a few guards was a small matter, but it caused quite a commotion below. Almost everyone noticed the little girl standing on the stool. Even the woman playing the musical instrument on the stage had her eyes fixed on him. After all, no matter how he looked at it, this little girl did not look like a guest who should be here. The brothel keeper naturally brought a few more guards over, but she didn't dare to make a move. After all, even a fool would know that he wasn't someone to be trifled with if he managed to defeat a few guards at such a young age. Renbachien tilted his head and heard Honeysuckle pointing at them and saying something like, "I'm not leaving, and I want those few people." The latter part of her sentence was naturally referring to the women on the stage. If Tong Jingye revealed his identity and said this, the brothel keeper might even give them one for free and send them all to the Tong residence. However, how could the brothel keeper agree to such a little girl's words? Renbachien sighed faintly. This child Honeysuckle was really troublesome. It seemed like he had to step in. Was it easy for him to drink wine with prostitutes? His plan was ruined by this little girl. He could imagine that half of the imperial court would be talking about a 3-year-old princess visiting a brothel tomorrow. Just as Renbachien was about to go downstairs, something happened below. A few people flew in and fell to the ground. There were guards, and there were also servants. Following which, a lady in red with a cold aura walked in slowly. Many people present immediately looked like they were watching a good show. It was obvious that this fierce lady was here to catch an adulterer. There was going to be a good show to watch. Many people were amazed when they saw the person who came. They thought that if they had such a person in their family, they would definitely not flirt outside. Many people's faces changed as they knew the identity of the person who came. Renbochin could only smile bitterly at this time. The family of 3 was reunited in a brothel. In all his years of living, he had never seen anyone bring their family to a brothel. When Honeysuckle saw the Empress come in, she immediately shrank her neck, rolled her eyes, and tried her best to hide behind someone else. However, how could she hide from the Empress? In a flash, she appeared beside her and pinched the back of her neck with one hand as if she was holding a little chick. Her other hand slapped her butt. Renbochin heard the slap even from the second floor. Honeysuckle's facial features twitched, and she tried her best not to cry. This slap from the Empress would cause her butt to be swollen for at least 3 days. Renbochin shook his head slightly and returned to his original seat while the Empress wasn't paying attention. "What interesting thing did you see? Tell me about it." Tong Jinya laughed when he saw Renbochin standing there for a long time. "I didn't see anything." Renbochin shook his head. "If you didn't see anything, why are you still standing there for such a long time? Could it be that you have taken a fancy to a lady?" Tong Jinya laughed at the top of his voice. "Do you want me to arrange something for you?" "Sure." It wasn't Renbochin who said this. A lady in red suddenly appeared in the room. She tossed the 2 ladies beside Renbochin to the side and sat down beside him with Honeysuckle in her hand. "Sir Tong, you must arrange something for me. If you don't..." The Empress sneered. The atmosphere was very awkward. The Empress, Zhao Prince Consort, and the princess were all present. Renbochin covered his face and didn't want to look at Tong Jinya. Feng Ho, Gui Hong, and the others all looked down. "Ha, ha, ha, I was just joking." Tong Jinya laughed dryly. "Women aren't as fun as drinking." The Empress's face turned green. She flipped the table. The entire table, along with the dishes, was flipped toward Tong Jinya. Then, she kicked the table with lightning speed and sent Tong Jinya flying. No matter what happened, beating up Tong Jinya was politically correct. Return to the palace. After saying that, the Empress disappeared without a trace. No one saw how the Empress came in or how she left. Her Majesty has gotten stronger. She's indeed the most talented person in 1,000 years, the Empress. Feng Ho and Gui Hong exclaimed in admiration. Renbochin looked at the hole in the wall and didn't look at anyone else. With his hands behind his back, he strolled back with a bleak look on his face. For the next week, the Empress didn't attend court, and Renbochin didn't show up either. A week later, Renbochin's eyes were sunken, his face was pale, and he had lost a lot of weight. He looked like a tuberculosis patient. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Chapter 1080. After another 2 months, everything in the imperial capital was finally on track. Renbochin also felt that there was no problem with his kidneys. However, other than dealing with various matters, he was busy practicing. After a few years, he finally felt that he was about to break through the intermediate level of the Earth Wheel and reach the advanced level. Even though it wasn't a big deal to the Empress, she could at least advance further. After that, he would complete the Earth Wheel before breaking through the Heavenly Gate and entering the Spirit Wheel level. To Renbochin, the most dangerous hurdle was the Sky Gate, but to him, it was just a straight path without any obstacles. He just had to follow the prescribed order and continue practicing. Or to put it another way, he would continue to spend money. Others were cultivating, but he was completely using medicinal herbs. If it weren't for the 60,000 mountains, no matter how rich the others were, they wouldn't be able to rely on Krypton gold to cultivate like him. Renbochin felt that he should send someone to find the second half of the ancient scroll of methods. He had asked the rearguard commandery to search for him, but there had been no news. This time, he was going to send Du Laolu to search. After all, Du Lao Lu was a contestant who could answer all the multiple-choice questions correctly based on his luck. This kind of luck was like a godsend when doing many things. Perhaps he could really find what he was looking for. At the same time, the experts led by Li Fu spent a lot of effort to deal with the cardinal heaven-level beasts that had mutated due to radiation. They finally arrived at the depths of the 60,000 mountains and met up with Qi Ziding. Radiation-mutated beasts were very difficult to deal with. Under normal circumstances, cardinal heaven-level beasts were much stronger than ordinary spirit will experts, but they were much weaker than spirit will experts with heaven-grade weapons. However, these mutated beasts weren't any weaker than spirit will experts who had condensed heaven-grade weapons. They completely relied on their physical bodies, and their physiques were tyrannical and extremely difficult to kill. The original 6 people who had attacked turned into 12, and it took some effort to kill them. On the one hand, Ren Baqin sent more people to guard the area. On the other hand, he also decided to avoid dropping nuclear warheads in places like the 60,000 mountains in the future. Vicious beasts, which were already powerful in the first place, became even more difficult to deal with after the mutation. If they were not restrained, who knew what kind of monsters they would create in the future? After Li Fu and the others met up with Qi Ziding and the others, they headed straight for the village of the foreign races. The first was the Thunder Barbarian tribe. This was a race that was as stubborn as the Aboriginals. Their appearances were slightly different from humans. They had 2 horns on their heads, and from this point, it could be seen that they were even more iron-headed than the Aboriginals. Most importantly, they had a certain level of mastery over thunder and lightning. At present, they were the only foreign races that had mastered the natural elements. Li Fu and Qi Ziding gathered together. There were 70 spirit will experts and more than 30 cardinal heaven experts, which added up to more than 100 people. The last time they attacked the Naga race, there were less than 20 spirit wheel and cardinal heaven experts. This time, there were 4 times that number. Furthermore, there were experts like Li Fu, who had reached the heaven and earth domain level. The night was still a sneak attack. Dozens of experts attacked different parts of the village. However, before they could rush in, the house in the middle exploded. A man with 2 horns on his head and a height of more than 2 meters let out a thunderous roar. "Who is it? All of you, get lost." Before he finished speaking, he was surrounded by lightning and pounced toward the people in the village. With a series of explosions, the experts of the Thunder Barbarian tribe rushed out of the houses. There were only 100 people in the village, but there were nearly 20 cardinal heaven-level experts. This was a terrifying ratio. Clang! The chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was stopped in midair, and both sides exchanged blows before both were sent flying. Li Fu held a short rod in his hand. His face was black, and his hands were numb. The moment they exchanged blows just now, he remembered a principle. Iron rods could conduct electricity. The chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was repelled. His eyes widened, and he saw that every expert of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was besieged by more than 2 experts of the same level. He immediately roared, and his body grew bigger. His muscles bulged as if he was wearing a suit of armor. The lightning on the surface of his body also became brighter. He raised the iron rod in his hand and smashed it toward Li Fu. Die! Li Fu didn't fight him head-on. He turned his body and pointed the short rod at the other party's shoulder. The chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was alarmed. The short rod didn't seem very powerful, but it gave him a great sense of crisis. He immediately swept the iron rod over, and a layer of lightning appeared on the iron rod. The 2 of them exchanged a few blows, but Li Fu didn't fight him head-on. However, there were continuous screams in the darkness. This time, the elites of the human race were besieged by 2 or 3 people. The experts of the Thunder Barbarian tribe fell one after another, and the ordinary people were all suppressed in the first wave of attacks. In less than 7 or 8 minutes, only the chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was left. Hundreds of experts hid in the dark to watch the battle between Li Fu and the chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe. This was the first time they had seen a battle of this level, and they all wanted to gain something from it. The eyes of the chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe were blood red, and he stared at Li Fu with murderous intent. Every strike of the long rod in his hand was accompanied by a gust of wind and lightning. "Abandoned race, all of you must die." The roar of the chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe made many people look murderous. If Li Fu hadn't spoken, they would have already attacked him. After seeing these foreign races and hearing about the abandoned race, everyone no longer doubted what he had said. The human race was indeed driven to the land of exile by these foreign races. Li Fu didn't say a word. Naturally, there was nothing to say between the human race and the foreign races. After dodging the other party's rod, the short rod in his hand suddenly left his hand and split into 7 in the air, sealing the area around the chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe. In an instant, the chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was hit 3 times in a row, and the flesh on his body exploded. However, he only grunted and rushed forward regardless of anything else. His tribe was dead, and he would die if he stayed here. He would rather die than escape. Even if he died, he would make the other party pay the price. However, at this moment, shouts and sounds of fighting suddenly came from the darkness. A group of people directly killed a path through the earth will experts that surrounded the perimeter. A few experts who went forward immediately started fighting with the other party. Those who came were from the 8-armed race, who had 4 arms and wielded 2 sabers. The scouts who were guarding outside the 8-armed race actually didn't get any news before they were killed by the 8-armed race. Among them, the leader waved his 6 arms, and the 6 sabers were like fluttering snow in the air. The saber gleams were like moonlight sprinkling down. In the night, several fire snakes that were several meters long met the sabers head-on, but they were directly chopped into several pieces and dissipated in the air. Zay! Ma Hongyu's paintbrush danced in the air, and the 8-armed race chief suddenly felt his feet go soft. The originally solid ground turned into mud, and even the surrounding houses began to sink. A starry sky suddenly appeared above the head of the 8-armed race chief, and the stars directly collided with the dazzling saber net. Half of the 8-armed race chief's body, which had already turned into mud, immediately sank. Although they didn't communicate, these experts cooperated very well. "All of you, get lost. Old Lazy, you are really becoming more and more backward," the 8-armed race chief shouted angrily. Together with his saber, he turned into a ball of light and rushed out of the mud. A huge saber that was tens of meters long slashed down in the air, but it exploded in the middle when it came into contact with this ball of light. However, this saber also obstructed her for a while, and more attacks fell one after another. The chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe saw the 8-armed race chief resisting the attacks and scolded, "Old witch, you don't need to be a busybody. Why aren't you getting lost with your cubs?" Although he was surprised that the 8-armed race, which had always been his enemy, would actually come to help him, he knew that even with the help of the 8-armed race, they still weren't a match for the other party. There were simply too many experts on the other side. First, set a small target, for example, 1 second. Chapter 1081. Renbochin received the intelligence report with a gloomy expression. There weren't many changes in the purge of the Thunder Barbarians' village. The village was destroyed, and the chief of the Thunder Barbarians was killed. Even the sudden appearance of the 8-armed race wouldn't change the overall situation. After all, they were the elites of the entire human race. If they couldn't even destroy 2 foreign race villages, the human race could forget about going back. 1 spirit will expert and 1 cardinal heaven expert each died, and 6 were seriously injured. The main casualties were at the hands of the chief of the 8-armed race. More than 60 Kismet heaven experts died, and nearly 100 were seriously injured. These losses were bearable. The chief of the 8-armed race didn't manage to escape and died of exhaustion. The most troublesome thing was that the 8-armed race had scattered their people in advance. Although the Aboriginals had killed a group of them, no one knew if there were any who had escaped. If there were any who had escaped, the human race might have to face the foreign races in advance. As for the time, it depended on how long it took for the news to travel from the depths of the 60,000 mountains to the foreign races. It was said that the world outside the 60,000 mountains was several times larger than the 60,000 mountains. Rinpoche estimated that it would take at most 20 years for the other party to respond and send people over. At the very least, it would only take a few years before they would have to face the foreign races. Time was too short. He originally estimated that it would take more than 100 years. Now, he could only plan ahead. First, he would let people pass through the 60,000 mountains, find suitable hiding places, and let some of the experts go there to improve their strength as much as possible. Next, he would have to improve the level of technology as soon as possible and develop more powerful weapons. In addition, the appearance of the 8-armed race gave him some guesses about the strength of the foreign races. Arms were the biggest distinguishing feature of this race. Ordinary people with 2 arms were at the Kismet heaven level, those with 4 arms were at the Cardinal heaven level, and those with 6 arms were at the same level as Lifu. The Aboriginals called it longevity heaven. If it had 8 arms, then it must be a level higher than that. It was hard to estimate how strong they were. After all, even Lifu had only just entered the heaven and earth level, and the strongest foreign races he had seen were only the chiefs of 2 small villages. This was the land of exile. Even if the foreign races weren't in the land of exile, they were at least on the periphery. There was no standard to measure how powerful the experts in the outside world were. With the Empress's strength, even if she couldn't take on an entire army by herself, she could at least take the head of an enemy general from a 1,000,000-strong army. In other words, if the outsiders attacked, the higher-ups of the human race wouldn't be able to resist at all. At the very least, one of them must be at least 1 level stronger than the longevity heaven or the heaven creation earth region. There were only 2 people who could achieve that in such a short period of time. The Empress and Li Yuanzhu. Thunder rumbled in the sky outside. Heavy rain poured down, and the sky became even darker. However, Rinpoche, who was in the room, wasn't affected much. After pondering for a moment, Rinpoche took the umbrella and returned to his bedroom. Halfway there, his lower body was drenched. The Empress wasn't watching the television series. Instead, she was reading a book attentively. The Empress had also seen the report that Rinpoche had seen. Rinpoche felt rather gratified as long as the Empress worked hard. Even if the Empress slept, her strength would increase. As long as she put in some effort, there would still be hope for the human race. Without disturbing the Empress from reading, Rinpoche walked to the back of the Empress and took a glance at the pictures in the book. He reached out to take the book and looked at the cover, 36 Skills of Rope Techniques. Rinpoche was deep in thought. He flipped the book from cover to cover, looked at the Empress, and asked, "Your Majesty, what is this?" "You will know tonight." The Empress glanced at him charmingly. Rinpoche opened his mouth in surprise and asked, "Your Majesty, is this the time to read this? I will be able to break through in half a year." The Empress said faintly, "You will need at least another 10 years to reach the spirit will level. Do you know what this means?" Rinpoche looked embarrassed and said, "It means that you will be a widow for 10 years. Pfft. The Empress spat at him and stretched, showing off her perfect curves. That dual cultivation technique is indeed beneficial. Otherwise, how could you have reached the advanced level of the earth will level so quickly? It's the same for me. Although I have been suppressing it and haven't broken through, my essence blood has become more condensed. I won't be able to suppress it for another half a year. Take advantage of this time to do dual cultivation again. After that, it will be up to you. Renbochin was speechless. In fact, he had benefited a lot more than the Empress. After every pair cultivation session, he would receive a surge of vital energy that would wash through every cell in his body. This energy would then be stored in every part of his body for his needs during cultivation. Otherwise, it would be good if he could reach the advanced level of the Earth will level in another 10 years. This was why the Empress had been suppressing her strength. But what does it have to do with this? Renbochin patted the 36 skills of rope techniques in his hand. He could understand why the Empress was suppressing her strength and dual cultivation. However, what did it have to do with this thing? It can make me happy. The Empress got up and poked his cheek with her finger. It's very important for me to be happy. The future is too dangerous, and you are too weak. Therefore, from today onwards, you will have to undergo special training. Renbochin scratched his bald head. Special training again. His focus was no longer on the 36 skills of rope techniques. He had been beaten up by Tong Lan for several years. He had just relaxed for 2 years, and it was starting again. Who was his opponent this time? Dual cultivation, once every 7 days from now on. Renbochin almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Dual cultivation, once every 7 days. 7 days at a time. Is this your special training, Your Majesty? Your Majesty, haste makes waste. Renbochin immediately said righteously. I feel that once a month is enough for me to improve. You need special training. I said it. Dual cultivation, once every 7 days was just something the Empress said. According to the condition of Renbochin's body, the recommendation given by the medical bureau was to have dual cultivation, once every 10 days. Furthermore, it required a large amount of precious herbs to barely support Renbochin's body. For the next 6 months, Renbochin had been undergoing special training. Every 7 days, he could only drag his weak body to deal with various matters like a tuberculosis patient. Even with the nourishment of various precious herbs, Renbochin's weight visibly decreased. He had dropped from more than 150 kilograms to 150 kilograms. One had to know that Renbochin's skeleton was much bigger than before. His entire body was filled with muscles. At 150 kilograms, Renbochin's body was like fine steel. Every bit of impurities had been completely removed, and his skin and muscles were more compact. His body's defense had increased by more than 1 level. His body had accumulated a large amount of essence energy, and every cell was filled with this extremely vigorous essence energy. If one didn't look at Renbochin's expression, the effects of this special training were indeed extremely significant. Chapter 1082. Imperial Capital, Imperial Palace. With thousands of winged cavalry warriors stationed here, not even a mosquito would be able to fly in. Qin Chuan, Tong Zhinya, Shui Yan, Xiong Yaohe, and many other experts stood 300 meters away from the bedchamber. They looked at the bedchamber in the distance with worry and excitement. Further inside, Exange was leading the palace guards to guard the place. One had to know that the Empress's breakthrough was currently the most important matter. The ancient race could finally produce another longevity heaven expert. As long as she broke through to the longevity heaven, the Empress could even surpass Li Fu and become the most powerful person in the world. Everyone had to take it seriously. Originally, there wasn't a need for such a big battle. However, the Empress had been suppressing her strength all along. She had spent half a year in Dao and another year on Earth. Now, she had reached the point where she had no choice but to break through. No one knew what would happen when the Empress broke through after forcefully suppressing her strength for so long. Just like a spring, the longer it was pressed, the greater its elasticity. Now that the Empress had been in seclusion for 3 days, a terrifying aura enveloped the entire palace. Under this aura, those who were slightly stronger felt that a great calamity was about to befall them. Even Qing Yuan and Hong Luan were pushed far away. Ren Baqian was the closest person to the bedchamber. At this moment, he could hear the vigorous heartbeat in the bedchamber. He was at least 100 meters away from the Empress, but from here, he could hear the Empress's heartbeat. It was like the sound of a drum, full of energy. Ren Baqian didn't know when it started, but he began to hear the sound of flowing water. The sound of water flowing became more rapid and louder. In the end, there was even a rumbling sound, like a waterfall. The sound of flowing water was the sound of the Empress's blood flowing. Just the sound of his heartbeat and blood was enough to make people feel terrified. At this moment, Ren Baqian weighed only 180 kilograms. He had lost quite a bit of weight, and his skin was sparkling and translucent. Coupled with his high reflectivity, he was so thin that he glistened. Ren Baqian sat on the ground, occasionally turning his head to ask Xianzhi, "When will Her Majesty break through? What's the situation now?" He had already asked this question several times. "I feel that His Majesty is accumulating power. It should be the final moment." Xianzhi took off her spectacles, wiped them, and put them back on. She had done the same action twice in the past 2 hours. It could be seen that her heart was still unsettled. She didn't know much about longevity heaven and therefore didn't know what the Empress was planning. In fact, for the Empress, breaking through was a piece of cake. However, it was like a spring. The greater the pressure, the higher it would bounce back. Thus, after breaking through to the heavenly longevity stage, the stronger it would become. At this moment, the terrifying aura that enveloped the palace finally changed. It seemed to surge like boiling water. The sound of blood rushing through his veins was also reaching its limit. Following a thunder-like heartbeat, everyone heard a cracking sound, as if something had cracked open. A huge amount of blood energy swept out from the bedchamber, bringing with it a huge amount of heat, like a great furnace. The imperial palace was suddenly swept up by a wild gale, and countless amounts of air were sucked into the imperial palace. All of the doors, windows, and roofs were blasted open, and the air directly formed a tornado on the roof, sucking in all of the surrounding air. Ren Baqian was almost sucked in. Fortunately, Xianzhi grabbed him from behind and placed him behind her. "This is a breakthrough." Ren Baqian felt that this scene was similar to the scene when Lu Hua was born. The same phenomenon occurred when the Empress broke through this time around. It should be. I can feel that His Majesty's power is getting stronger and stronger. Xianzhi looked at the phenomenon in front of her in amazement. Even she didn't expect the Empress's breakthrough to have such a huge impact. No matter which corner of the imperial capital it was, as long as there weren't any tall buildings blocking the view, everyone could see the terrifying wind pillar above the palace. Those who knew the truth were all shocked. Just breaking through could cause such a huge phenomenon. How strong would Her Majesty be after breaking through? It wasn't until 2 hours later that the wind pillar above the palace slowly dissipated. This also meant that the Empress's breakthrough was finally complete. Ren Baqian quickly walked into the rubble of the bedchamber and looked for the Empress. It was easy to find. Everything else had been swept up by the wind pillar just now. Only the red figure was standing there, emitting a huge amount of heat. "Your Majesty." Ren Baqian walked over with a face full of joy. It was great that the Empress had successfully broken through. Although he already knew that there wouldn't be any problems, he was still a little worried. Now, he was finally relieved. Get someone to bring food over first. Let them keep doing it and don't stop. The Empress's voice was heard. Ren Baqian turned around and gave the order before walking to the Empress's side. "Stay away from me. I have just broken through and need some time to control my body." The Empress shook her head at him. She was afraid that she would accidentally slap him to death. She was even more afraid that she wouldn't be able to control herself and swallow him. Hungry, so hungry. She felt that she could swallow a mountain now. The other ministers who rushed over were stopped outside. Fortunately, the food was sent over quickly. The Aboriginals needed a lot of food to break through, and there were already people preparing it. The Empress ate from afternoon until midnight. No matter what was sent to her, she would swallow it. Even if it was a bone, she would bite it and swallow it. The blood essence in the Empress's body was quickly replenished. Her figure didn't change, but even outside the hall, one could feel the terrifying power of her qi and blood. According to statistics, the Empress ate more than 7,000 kilograms of meat after breaking through, all of which were the meat of Kismet heaven-level beasts. She also ate hundreds of kilograms of fruits and a large number of precious herbs. The next day, the Empress chased everyone far away and began to practice how to control her own strength. From afar, Rinpoche saw with his own eyes that the arena, which was 100 meters wide and 1.5 meters tall, was turned into ruins by a punch from the Empress. This left Rinpoche speechless. This punch from the Empress was comparable to a small nuclear bomb. With her speed, Rinpoche couldn't see her anymore. The Empress only needed 1 second to cross a distance of 1,000 meters. Rinpoche couldn't understand how powerful the Empress was. Every move of the Empress carried unparalleled power. It could be said that if the Empress was thrown to earth, she could single-handedly destroy a country as long as she had enough food. Even a nuclear bomb wouldn't pose much of a threat to the Empress. If she couldn't hit the Empress, it would be useless no matter how powerful she was. Unless they used a nuclear bomb to plow the area within 1,000 kilometers of the Empress, she would be able to survive even if she was injured as long as she avoided the center of the explosion. The Empress practiced for a full 3 days before she could master the initial increase in her strength. It would take some time for her to fully master it. Rinpoche was finally able to conduct a series of tests with the Empress. Chapter 1083. First, Rinpoche conducted some physical tests to get a better understanding of the Empress's physical condition. Originally, the Empress could lift a weight of 3,000 kilograms with one hand, and the impact of a punch could reach 50,000 kilograms. After this advancement, the Empress's strength increased by 4 times. She could lift 25,000 kilograms with one hand, and the impact of a punch could reach 250,000 kilograms. The strength of the Empress's legs was twice the strength of her fist, which was why she could burst out with such astonishing speed. The Empress's speed could reach 3 times the speed of sound. In contrast, the Empress had a strong physical body. In the past, sniper rifles and armor-piercing bullets could penetrate her skin at a distance of 500 meters, but now, guns and ordinary kinetic weapons were completely useless against her. As for higher-level weapons, they couldn't be tested. After all, Rinpoche couldn't use missiles to bomb the Empress. Furthermore, missiles were useless against the Empress. Regardless of whether it was shock waves or fragments, they couldn't penetrate her defense. As for weapons like fuel-air bombs, even ordinary people could survive them. The greatest lethality came from the flames and suffocation. These kinds of weapons posed no threat to the Empress. Probably only the high temperature produced by nuclear fission could pose a certain degree of threat to the Empress. However, Rinpoche couldn't throw a nuclear bomb at the Empress. As for her reflexes, she could easily shoot down bullets with a bow and arrow. In the past, she could catch bullets with her bare hands. Now, she had advanced a step further. Catching bullets with her bare hands and shooting bullets with a bow and arrow were 2 completely different concepts. The Empress immediately fired a chain of 50 12.7mm anti-air machine gun bullets. She was even able to do it with ease. After that, Rinpoche asked someone to test the Empress's hair and dander in the laboratory. The Empress's hair would only curl at 1,000 degrees Celsius and burn at 1,200 degrees Celsius. As for the dander, it would only change when it reached 1,500 degrees Celsius. This was just a little dander taken from the Empress's body. As for the Empress's skin, it was supported by her blood and had a higher resistance. Finally, Rinpoche also tested the Empress's epidermal cells and blood and discovered something extremely shocking. The Empress's cells were extremely exclusive and aggressive. They swallowed all foreign substances and proliferated. Most of the viruses and toxins tested could only become nutrients for the Empress's cells. It could be said that most biological and chemical toxins had no effect on the Empress. If he did, he probably ate some snacks. Previously, Rinpoche had tested that earth-will experts already had a certain level of resistance to some common poisons. For example, when the Empress used sarin gas in the 9 pavilions, ordinary people almost didn't have any chance to react. However, earth-will experts could already persevere for 1 to 2 minutes, and spirit-will experts could even survive for 10 minutes. It was just that most of their essence energy would be used to resist the poison, and their strength would be greatly reduced. The bodies of the aboriginals were stronger, and the resistance of Kismet Heaven and Cardinal Heaven experts was much stronger than that of Earth Wheel and Spirit Wheel experts. As for the Longevity Heaven, most of the poisons had lost their effects and could only serve as an additional meal. From the results of the test, it could even be said that the Empress was only wearing a layer of human skin, and her essence had already completely evolved. The results of the test were shocking. If the Everlasting Heaven had such a terrifying strength, how powerful would it be above the Everlasting Heaven? Furthermore, the Empress wasn't considered to be at the top in Longevity Heaven. Longevity Heaven was divided into 4 levels, and the Empress had suppressed her strength for so long. After breaking through, her irresistible strength had increased greatly, even surpassing Li Fu's. However, she was only at the 2nd level of Longevity Heaven. Rinpoche began to feel that he had thought too simply. Nuclear bombs were indeed lethal to ordinary foreign races, but they weren't much of a threat to Longevity Heaven experts. Unless the other party was at the core of the explosion. However, with the Empress's reaction speed, it was almost impossible to blow up a Longevity Heaven expert. Only when the other party had just come into contact with a nuclear bomb and didn't know what it was could it kill a few of them. When the other party knew about the nuclear bomb, they could even use bows and arrows to blow it up in the air. Back then, the godly archers of Great Xia could shoot a grenade back into the wall, and the Empress could shoot down a flying sword. Rinpoche didn't believe that the foreign races couldn't do the same. After understanding the strength of the real experts in this world and discovering that the effect of nuclear bombs wasn't as desired, Rinpoche began to think about other weapons on Earth. However, after thinking about it carefully, he realized that the current weapons on Earth weren't suitable for this world. All these years, Rinpoche had been paying attention to the development of weapons on Earth. The biggest problem was that the powerful weapons were too big and too clumsy. For example, particle beam weapons. Although they couldn't be used in actual combat, there were still considerable research results. The biggest problem with such weapons were 2 points. First, they were too big. The huge demand for energy made it impossible for such weapons to be small. The charging time was too long, and it was difficult to aim at small targets that were moving at high speeds and changing directions. It would be a huge target if it was placed there. Furthermore, the particles would disperse in the atmosphere and have a very short range. As for laser weapons, they were also huge in size, but they were better than particle weapons in that they could be used for long-range attacks. However, they needed satellites in space to refract them. Not to mention the problem of satellites, this kind of attack wasn't much of a threat to experts who could move at a speed several times faster than the speed of sound on the ground. As for microwave weapons, they mainly used electromagnetic radiation to destroy electronic equipment. In fact, the development of weapons on Earth over the past few years was mostly in the direction of destroying electronic equipment. Earth had already entered the era of electronic warfare, which was completely meaningless to this world. There was only one type of weapon that was suitable for this world and could pose a certain threat to experts: electromagnetic weapons. Due to the limitations of superconducting materials, electromagnetic weapons were currently not satisfactory, but this direction was also the most likely to be realized. It seemed like Rinpoche had to fully promote the research of electromagnetic weapons on Earth. He hoped that he would be able to obtain satisfactory results. In addition, he needed a spaceship that was large enough. Even if it was a spaceship in the atmosphere, he could still escape with the Empress. This was very likely to be achieved. After all, Earth's current technology was already sufficient. They were even close to completing a lunar base and preparing to build a base on Mars. That night, there was a banquet to celebrate the Empress's breakthrough to the longevity heaven realm. Many of the court officials at the banquet praised the Empress's talent and strength, saying that she was the first in thousands of years. This wasn't an exaggeration. After all, the Empress was only 34 years old. She had broken through to the second level of longevity heaven at the age of 34, so it wasn't an exaggeration to praise her. Only the Empress wasn't very happy. She looked at everyone coldly. "Do you think I relied on my talent? I relied on hard work. When you were sleeping, I was cultivating. When you were eating, I was cultivating. When you were indulging in debauchery, I was cultivating. Of course, I have talent, but hard work is the most important factor for me to be able to reach this stage. As an important court official, you have to work hard like me when you are about to face an unknown and powerful enemy. The so-called talent is just an excuse for you." Everyone, Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 1084. After reprimanding all the court officials, the Empress returned to her palace with a cold expression, still feeling dissatisfied. Rinpoche really wanted to say, "Don't you know whether you have a cheat or not?" Although he didn't know how strong Li Yuanzhu was, he knew how strong the Empress was. She reached longevity heaven at the age of 34 after giving birth and suppressing her strength for a long time. She broke through to the second level of longevity heaven. She could increase her strength 24 hours a day even while sleeping. This talent wasn't just a cheat, but an extremely bad one. The Empress was like some mythical creatures, such as dragons or other mythical beasts. Even if she didn't cultivate, her strength would increase to a certain level as she grew older. If it wasn't for the fact that she had given birth to a child and there was no reproductive isolation, Rinpoche would have doubted whether the Empress was of human blood. People like him relied on their own hard work and couldn't grow as fast as the Empress sleeping. The Empress sat on the couch while Rinpoche lay on his back. Recently, they had been sleeping in separate beds. The Empress was afraid that she would accidentally slap him to death while sleeping. "I know why the late Emperor and father are leaving," the Empress suddenly said. Rinpoche thought about it and roughly guessed the reason. "Is it because you can't improve here?" The Empress glanced at him and didn't expect him to understand so quickly. She nodded and said, "Yes, I've realized that I can no longer improve here." Although the Empress had been busy controlling her sudden increase in strength, she immediately understood the impact this world had on her since her strength had automatically increased all the time in the past. Rinpoche knew that the Empress would sooner or later go to the other side of the 60,000 mountains to improve her strength. This was the plan, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. Rinpoche definitely couldn't leave. Although he could improve his cultivation speed by going there, technology was the capital to face the foreign races in the future. "Your Majesty, you should wait for them to open the passage to the 60,000 mountains before going there," Rinpoche said. Half a year ago, many experts had continued to go deep into the 60,000 mountains. On one hand, they were looking for the possible existence of the 8-armed race, and on the other hand, they were looking for the passage to leave the mountains. At the same time, they were also looking for the villages of other races. However, the first 2 points were the most important. It wasn't expected to take too long. After all, it had only taken the human race 3 years to cross the 60,000 mountains. At present, everyone was already in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. Even a spirit will expert would need a year to reach this place. At the very least, they had reached the latter half of the 60,000 mountains. The existence of a mutated tribe village proved that they were heading in the right direction. With the strength and speed of a spirit will expert, it would only take a few months to a year to find the exit. Of course, the Empress could also go there now. By the time she arrived, they would have already found the location. However, with her status as the Empress, she couldn't just leave as she pleased. There were still many things to be arranged in the imperial court. The Empress nodded and replied, "Indeed, it will take a few months to make the arrangements." Fortunately, they had the communication equipment. Even if they were on the other side of the 60,000 mountains, they could still communicate in time. Moreover, there are 2 other places that I need to visit. One is the tomb of the human sovereign, and the other is Mount Liuzue. I have always wanted to know what is in the belly of the mountain. Officials in the imperial court, how many people is Her Majesty planning to bring away? Ren Baqian suddenly asked. Everyone in the imperial court was a cardinal heaven expert and could be said to be extremely talented. If they left this world, it was entirely possible for them to advance further. Although it was possible to reach longevity heaven in this world, it was extremely difficult. It should be easier to break through on the other side of the 60,000 mountains. I will bring a few people to take a look first. If it is really as expected, I will let others take turns to go. The Empress already had a plan in mind. The imperial court in Dayo was indeed powerful and could suppress all directions. It wasn't like the Yun nation in Great Xia, where the forces in the underworld were chaotic and could even influence the imperial court. At this time, this had become the biggest weakness. If these people were brought over, then the imperial court would immediately stop issuing orders. They couldn't possibly let all the officials remotely command them, right? After chatting for a while, the Empress began to cultivate and then went to sleep. Ren Baqian sighed slightly. He had been married for less than 7 years, and he was about to be separated. When the Empress went to that area, it would be the time for the 7-year itch. Of course, the most important thing was that there was no need for special training. In the past, he felt that those who wanted power over children were really superficial. Now, he felt that he was really superficial in the past. The next day, Ren Baqian contacted Lin Dong to prepare for the trip to the emperor's tomb. At the same time, he looked for Du Laolu. Ding! The bearded Du Laolu stood in front of Ren Baqian. Although he wasn't at Kismet heaven, he was at the peak of four-way heaven. In a few years, he might be able to reach Kismet heaven. Of course, ordinary people with slightly better talent could also reach this level. With his family background, the food and medicinal herbs that he usually ate, his talent could be said to be useless. Ren Baqian didn't keep him in suspense. He looked at him with a faint smile and said, "The world is so big. Do you want to see it?" After hearing Ren Baqian's words, Du Laolu was slightly shocked. All these years, they couldn't even graduate. When did Yagüe become so kind? He wasn't a fool and knew that there must be something that he needed to do. However, this was also in line with his wishes. One had to know that his studies were getting more and more difficult, and it was difficult for him to keep up with the progress no matter how hard he racked his brains. He used to be able to grow hair, but now, it couldn't even grow anymore. Although it wasn't a big deal, it also showed his current pain. He immediately rejoiced and said, "Dean, feel free to tell me what you need." "Okay," Ren Baqian responded softly and through the re-visualization to him. "Look at this material. When you go out, pay attention to ancient scrolls made of this material and send them back when you find them." Du Laolu carefully felt the animal skin of the ancient scroll. After a while, he raised his head and asked, "Where can I find it?" "Up to you. Just treat it as a vacation and go wherever you want." Renbochin wanted to see if he could rely on Du Lalio's heaven-defying luck to find the second volume of the Ancient Scroll of Methods. "You can make a trip to Great Xia to look for Qinglian first. I will give you her location later, and she will take you to a person called Su Yu. You can look for the second volume after that." Su Yu was Su Qing's military advisor and had the ability to be a poisonous healer. In the previous battles between the Revolutionary Army and the Great Xia Army, as long as Su Yu said that the Great Xia Army would win, they would inexplicably lose no matter what advantage they had. Otherwise, the Revolutionary Army wouldn't have been able to conquer more than half of Great Xia in a few years. Now that the situation had reversed, Great Xia was like a candle in the wind. Renbochin was going to use the power of a poisonous healer to increase the success rate of Su Yu's search for the ancient scroll. "Understood." Du Laolu nodded. "Your wife will go with you. Get ready and set off immediately," Renbochin finally said. Du Laolu wasn't very strong, but his wife was. She had already reached the middle stage of the Kismet Heaven level and could fight with a late-stage Earth Will expert. With her around, he didn't need to send anyone to protect him. Du Lalio's face immediately turned bitter. He was still thinking about going out to indulge in debauchery, but he didn't expect to have to go with that ferocious female beast. "Dean, I can actually go by myself." Renbochin sneered. "Back then, you eloped with someone and caused quite a ruckus. Now, you despise me. Get lost. We will set off when you are ready. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers." Chapter 1085. After another 3 days, the Empress was ready to set off for the Emperor's tomb. The tomb was located in the middle of Great Xia, and it was reasonable to travel light. However, Great Xia was in chaos now, and they had to pass through the territory of the Revolutionary Army before reaching the imperial court. The Empress didn't hide her identity and brought 1,000 winged cavalry warriors with her. Presumably, neither side would be stupid enough to provoke her. Anyway, even if they were stupid, they wouldn't be able to defeat them. 1,000 winged cavalry warriors would require at least 50,000 soldiers to be a threat and 100,000 soldiers to encircle and annihilate them. Not to mention, there was also the Empress, who was the third most powerful expert in the world. Both sides had been fighting for several years, so how could they have the strength to spare? The group of more than 1,000 people didn't carry the Empress's flag, but with her imperial carriage, the winged cavalry warriors could recognize them at a glance. Naturally, no one knew who was in this group. After more than 10 days, they arrived at the border between Dayo, the Yun nation, and Great Xia and turned north. After all, there wasn't any danger on this trip, and she was allowed to follow along to gain experience. The most important thing was that they didn't know what kind of trouble she would cause if she was left alone in the palace. Renbochin flipped through Li Fu's godly rod along the way. Speaking of which, Li Fu called it a weakness. In his opinion, everything had a weakness, and this weakness was the point of death. As long as this point was hit, even an ordinary person could break a rock with his finger. Previously, Renbochin had been tempted to understand some of this, but unfortunately, he hadn't mastered it. Now that the Empress had reached longevity heaven, her destructive power was at most a few hundred meters and could at most break a small hill. It was completely incomparable to Li Fu's ability to break a mountain with one strike. In any case, Li Fu couldn't surpass the Empress in strength. In that case, the problem lay in this rod, which wasn't much different from his strength. Even the Empress believed that this technique created by Li Fu was terrifying and could be considered the strongest attack in the world. However, the Empress didn't think that she would lose in a real fight. In any case, she didn't think that she would lose. However, this was enough for Rinpochen to get excited and pick up the secret scroll to study and practice again. Lin Dong was already waiting at the border. Both parties met up. When he saw the Empress in the imperial chariot, his heart immediately tightened and he felt a sense of panic. It was as if the person in front of him could take his life with just a wave of her hand. Even if the other party didn't do anything, his back was still drenched in sweat. The last time he met Qi Zixiao, he did not feel this way. Although she was strong, she could only make him feel a little pressured. But now, Lin Dong asked in astonishment, "President, did you make a breakthrough?" Originally, he would have called the Empress by her name. After all, she was an expert of the same level. Even if he wasn't a match for her, he wouldn't lower his status. But now, the feeling that the Empress gave her terrified her, and she subconsciously changed the way she addressed her. Furthermore, he couldn't address Qi Zixiao as Her Majesty. After all, he wasn't from Dayo. Thus, he simply called him President. In any case, Qi Zixiao was currently the leader of Go Home. "Leader Lin, you have a good eye." The Water Empress nodded. Even though he had already guessed it, Lin Dong was still shocked to hear the Empress admit it. For thousands of years, there were very few people who had reached this level. However, the person in front of him had reached this level in his 30s. His talent was truly astonishing. In fact, everyone who reached the spirit will level was a genius, and those who could condense a heaven-grade weapon were geniuses among geniuses. However, Lin Dong had no choice but to admit that they were merely geniuses of this era. Over the past thousands of years, there had been countless experts like them. People like Qi Zixiao were considered to be at the forefront even among the countless heroes over the past thousands of years. Lin Dong was both shocked and envious. At his level, how could he not yearn for a higher level? "Congratulations, President. Now, it's a joyous occasion for the human race," Lin Dong said. He didn't compliment the Empress's talent, or else she might have corrected him. "President, now that you have advanced a step further, the success rate of opening the tomb of the human emperor will be much higher." Lin Dong smiled. This was also what Rinpochen and the Empress thought. The things left behind in the tomb of the human emperor were naturally left for future generations to open. In this world, the highest level one could reach was longevity heaven or the level of opening heaven and earth. As such, there was a high possibility that one could directly open the tomb. If the Empress couldn't open it, then no one in the human race could. Seeing the Empress, Rinpochen was completely relieved. Li Yuanzhu had previously informed Rinpochen that she wanted Li Fu to make a trip. At present, Li Fu was still leading the team in the 60,000 mountains, but Qi Zixiao had also broken through to this level. Afterward, the Empress asked some questions about the tomb of the human emperor, and Rinpochen listened for a while before the team set off again. At first, Rinpochen thought that he would soon encounter the volunteer army. Even though the war was at a critical juncture and they couldn't split their troops, the volunteer army would more or less deploy some troops at the border. He didn't expect to see any sign of the volunteer army after walking for a whole day. Rinpochen thought about it and knew that it was most likely Lin Dong's arrangement. After all, he was the leader of a famous evil sect, and he still had this bit of strength. He wouldn't believe that there weren't any of his people in the volunteer army. Sure enough, Lin Dong found Rinpochen soon after. Compared to facing Qi Zixiao, it was more convenient to deal with the weak, reasonable, and intelligent Rinpochen. "I have transferred the patrolling troops away, but there are too many people ahead, so I can't hide it. To be honest, I originally thought that you would travel light." Lin Dong smiled. "Thank you, Chief Lin." Rinpochen cupped his hands and smiled. The Empress could ignore Lin Dong, but he couldn't. However, he changed his tone and asked, "Even if they know, what can they do?" Lin Dong nodded and replied, "Indeed. Not to mention your strength, just the 1,000 winged cavalry warriors are enough to make everyone give up. In this way, some people will definitely follow, but it doesn't matter. After the emperor's tomb is opened, it doesn't matter if they find out. Both sides understood this, but Lin Dong still had to greet them. As expected, they were observed from afar before they even reached the first city. Moreover, it was the general of the volunteer army who was observing from afar with 2,000 cavalry warriors. After discovering the identity of this group, he sent someone to inquire. Unfortunately, they were thrown out before they could even see the Empress. If the other party had come in person, Renbachien might have met him. After all, he had a cooperative relationship with Su Qing. However, the other party actually sent his subordinates to inquire, which was an insult to the Empress's status. Although Renbachien could understand that the other party didn't dare to take risks, it didn't mean that he could accept it. The other party didn't know the Empress's intentions and didn't dare to approach, so he followed from afar. The news of Qi Zixiao leading 1,000 winged cavalry warriors to Great Xia quickly spread to Su Qing and the others. Chapter 1086. Why is Qi Zixiao here? You even brought 1,000 winged cavalry warriors? Su Qing was a little stunned. After being in charge of the revolutionary army for several years, Su Qing's appearance had not changed much, but he gave off a much calmer feeling. His body also carried a dignified aura, which was extraordinary at first glance. For Qi Zixiao to enter the Great Xia with such great fanfare, there must be something important. Could it be related to the Xia family? The Xia family had been in control of the world for hundreds of years and had a deep foundation. Maybe they had something that could attract her. Otherwise, even if something were to happen, there would be no need for her to bring 1,000 winged cavalry warriors with such great fanfare. After all, this isn't Dao's territory, so you guessed. Su Qing's expression changed slightly. According to what Siyu said, it was not impossible. The 1,000 winged cavalry warriors were too conspicuous. Although he had an agreement with Dao, that was all there was to it. It was in Dao's interest for Great Xia to be in chaos. Now that they had the absolute advantage, it wasn't impossible for the Xia family to use some treasure to invite Qi Zixiao, allowing Dao to intervene and bring the situation back to balance. It was also in Dao's interest. But why did Qi Zixiao come here personally? After some thought, he looked at Qing Lian, wanting to hear what she had to say. Qi Zixiao is not someone who can be easily persuaded. Even if the Xia family has some treasures that could tempt her, she would not personally act. Qing Lian said bluntly. Su Qing nodded slightly. This was also something he could not understand. Perhaps the Xia family's treasure is too important. Su Yu guessed. That's possible, but the probability is less than 3%. Qing Lian changed the topic and mentioned something else. Many things have happened in the Jianghu over the past 2 years. Many experts have banded together. Although many experts stayed outside the imperial court and fought on their own, both the imperial court and the volunteer army were paying attention to these experts. After all, the strength of these experts could already affect the situation of a battle to a certain extent, especially when it came to assassination. It was not impossible for them to take the head of a general among millions of soldiers. Therefore, both sides wanted to rope them in, but they also maintained vigilance against them, constantly paying attention to them. You mean the so-called go-home organization? In the past year, many experts had gone into hiding. Now, there were only a few people who were in the top 100 of the world's experts list. Qi Zixiao's visit had something to do with them. But how do you explain the 1,000 winged cavalry warriors? Su Yu questioned. It was impossible for them not to pay attention to the organization at home. However, the crux of the matter now was that Qi Zixiao had brought 1,000 winged cavalry warriors with her to Dao. This was the reason why everyone was uneasy. After all, this was Great Xia, and both sides were at war. 1,000 winged cavalry warriors could already affect the current situation, and everyone couldn't help but guess the reason behind it. Qi Zixiao is one of the leaders of the Go Home organization. The main purpose is to deal with the so-called foreign races. The disappearance of those experts is related to this. Qi Zixiao's appearance here is 70% likely related to this as well. Qing Lian pursed her lips and smiled lightly. Her smile was filled with strong confidence. You know a lot about it. Su Qing's pupils shrank. He didn't know much about that organization. However, Qing Lian seemed to understand it very well. I do, but it has nothing to do with your great cause, Qing Lian said casually. What's the point of thinking so much? Just ask him directly. Su Qing tapped his fingers on the tea table beside him and pondered for a moment. With Qi Zixiao's temperament, she would disdain to lie. It was indeed the most suitable to send someone to inquire directly. He might be able to deduce something from her words. Who should we send? If his status was too low, he would not be able to see Qi Zixiao. Those with high status have their own duties. I'll go. I'm also a little curious. Qing Lian stood up and said, Tell everyone not to act rashly first. Su Qing nodded. Naturally, he didn't want to anger Qi Zixiao. While Su Qing and the others were guessing, the imperial court of Great Xia was doing the same. The new emperor of Great Xia had been in office for several years. Great Xia was in a precarious situation and was on the verge of collapse. The new emperor couldn't sleep at night, had white hair, and was no longer in high spirits. The biggest mistake he made after ascending to the throne was to attack Dao again. If not for this, the situation wouldn't have deteriorated so rapidly, and Great Xia wouldn't have been completely hollowed out and unable to suppress the four sides. For the past few years, the imperial court had thought of giving up the etiquette and seeking help from the outside world. However, the Qin nation was separated by the Yun nation, which was a corner of Dao. As for the people sent to Dao, most of them were intercepted and killed by the experts in the revolutionary army. Occasionally, 2 of them broke through, but they didn't get to see Qi Zixiao. They didn't even get to see her face, let alone move her. However, even though the imperial court's strength had been greatly reduced and they were besieged in a corner, their eyes and ears weren't completely cut off. They had also found out that Qi Zixiao had brought 1,000 winged cavalry warriors into Great Xia. Although the chances weren't high, they still wanted to try their best. At this time, Renbaqian and the Empress were boating on the river. It was a clear and slanting rain, green mountains, and clear waters. Boating on the river was naturally a carefree experience that couldn't be enjoyed in the palace. The rolling waters of the Yangtze River wash away all heroes. Right and wrong, success and failure, vanish in the blink of an eye. How many things since ancient times have become a joke? Renbaqian stood at the bow of the boat and softly recited. Good poem. Lin Dong tapped his palm with his fan and praised. This poem is good, but it's tragic and stirring. Zhao Prince Consort is going to do great things, so this poem isn't suitable. Renbaqian had a majestic figure and a fierce look on his face. He stood there and pretended to be a romantic scholar. After hearing Lin Dong's words, he beamed with joy. He had long wanted to show off like this. He always felt that it was very pretentious. Renbaqian then waved his hand and said, I had a sudden feeling, I was just bragging. Lin Dong immediately laughed and felt that Zhao Prince Consort was really interesting. The Empress sat at the stern of the boat with one hand supporting her chin. She was so angry that she almost laughed when she saw Renbaqian's behavior. He was really shameless. As the river surged, the water splashed into the boat. Renbaqian looked down at the water stains in the boat and then at the waterline, which almost reached the edge of the boat. He was deep in thought. Who is the one who is too heavy? Lin Dong smiled and shook his head. He turned around, cupped his hands, and said, "I won't disturb the two of you anymore." His figure flashed and he landed on the surface of the river. Step by step, he walked toward the shore. It was indeed a graceful sight. Renbochin felt that Lin Dong was much more successful in showing off than him. If he jumped, he would have to call for help. However, as soon as Lin Dong walked away, the waterline immediately dropped a lot. Renbochin sighed and said, "There is indeed one more person." The Empress sneered. This boat could carry 4 to 5 people, but 3 people almost capsized. Don't you know who is heavier? Now that Renbochin's weight had increased to 150 kilograms like a balloon, one person was equivalent to 2 people. Renbochin patted the air, and the boat immediately shot forward like an arrow. In just a moment, they could see the city wall in the distance. The two of them entered the city and toured the scenery. One looked fierce, and the other was full of heroic spirit. They couldn't be considered an immortal couple, but they were still eye-catching. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1087. Changle City was an important city in Great Xia, and the waterways weren't closed. Renbochin and the Empress entered the city on a boat, but the winged cavalry were stopped outside the city. Even after receiving Su Qing's order, the city guards did not dare to casually let the winged cavalry into the city. The city gates were closed and the city walls were heavily guarded. However, this was just for show. There were 1,000 winged cavalry warriors, and each of them had the ability to climb up the city walls. The city guards definitely wouldn't be able to resist them. Which one of you is the leader? This is the Grand Xia. What business do you have here? The guard was surnamed Wang Ji, and was a disciple of a large clan. As early as a few years ago, when the revolutionary army swept through the lands and Great Xia was in a state of decline, the descendants of various clans had already joined the revolutionary army. Betting on both sides was a way for aristocratic families to protect themselves. The leader of the winged cavalry was called Ho Dajiang and was one step away from becoming a cardinal heaven expert. He was even stronger than Gongjing from back then. He pushed the sheep forward and said, "Do you think the city wall can stop us? Open the door, we'll leave after buying some food in the city." The 1,000 winged cavalry warriors consumed a lot of rations every day. Even though they brought along some meat when they set off, most of it was the Empress's rations. These rations still had to be prepared in Great Xia. Seeing that the other party had no intention of attacking the city, Wang Ji's expression changed. He knew that if he really angered the other party, the city walls would indeed fall. He could still hold his ground against other people, but he did not dare to face these barbarians. The strong feared the unreasonable, and these barbarians were not just ordinarily unreasonable. If you dare to be unreasonable with them, they will dare to take your life. Moreover, there were orders from the higher-ups. He immediately raised his voice and said, "There are too many of you. If all of you enter the city, it will definitely cause chaos in the city. Only 100 people can enter. Leave the city immediately after you buy it, and don't cause any trouble." Ho Dajiang sneered. "You talk too much. What do I need you to say? Hurry up and open the city gates. Otherwise, I'll break the city and kill your entire family." Wang Ji's complexion was rather unsightly. He had already intended to retreat, but his opponent was not giving him any leeway at all. He was filled with regret. If he had known earlier, he would have ignored them from the start. Wang Ji's expression changed several times before he commanded, "Open the door." After he finished speaking, he turned around and left, not bothering with them anymore. In any case, the higher-ups had already instructed him not to take any responsibility. Ho Dajiang smiled contemptuously. This group of people from Great Xia was really weak. Soon after, the winged cavalry entered the city in a single file and went to look for grain stores in the city to purchase rations, causing a huge commotion. A group of men weighing more than 150 kilograms rushed into the shops with long swords in their hands. Those who did not know would have thought that they were robbers. Those who knew would know that they were robbers. A grain worth a few hundred taels of silver was easily snatched away by just throwing a few pieces of silver. Previously, Renbochin had asked them to pay when they were due. However, from their point of view, they had already paid. At the very least, they didn't take the money from the grain stores and even gave them money. Not only did they not pay less, but they also paid a lot more. Renbochin and the Empress were on the boat and naturally noticed the commotion caused by the winged cavalry entering the city. However, they didn't say much. The Empress didn't care, and Renbochin couldn't be bothered to talk about it. All his attention was on the livelihood of the people in the city. It could be seen that these peasants were doing a good job. The lives of the commoners were not greatly affected. Moreover, with the sweet potatoes, although the people in the city were not considered wealthy, they could still fill their stomachs and live a stable life. This could be seen from the words and actions of the commoners on both sides of the street. The boat crossed a stone bridge. The commotion caused by the winged cavalry hadn't affected this place yet, and the two of them saw something interesting. On the street, two men were facing each other with swords in their hands. One of them was wearing a bamboo hat, and the other was wearing a scholar's green robe. It looked like a duel, and there were many commoners watching the show. The two of them did not know how long they had been standing there. The boat was about to pass by them, but they were still staring at each other. Those who didn't know would think that they were competing with each other's aura. Renbochin didn't see the excitement, so he dug out a piece of wood from the boat. With a flick of his hand, it flew toward the two of them. Ouch! Someone in the crowd cried out in pain. He was a few meters away from the two of them. The Empress immediately revealed a mocking expression. Go ahead if you can. Renbochin didn't know the accuracy of the Empress's hidden weapon back then, but how could he not know now? He immediately raised his eyebrows in provocation. No eyebrows. The Empress smiled faintly. She pinched her fingers on the boat, and a fingernail-sized piece of wood appeared in her hand. She then flicked it toward the two of them. Ouch! This time, a cry of pain came from the other side of the crowd. It was even more crooked than Renbochin's. Following which, the two of them exchanged blows with each other, and the cries of pain could be heard incessantly from the crowd. In no time, all the onlookers had run away, leaving only the two suspected swordsmen there. Their expressions kept changing, and they didn't know what exactly was going on. Forget it. Her Majesty and I are evenly matched, and we won't be able to tell who is better even if we compete for a while longer. Renbochin waved his hand. The two of them were really bored. Two great experts competing to see who could throw the projectile more crookedly was a joke to outsiders. Renbochin felt that compared to those two swordsmen, he was indeed an expert on the same level as the Empress. Not long after, the two of them went ashore and toured around the city for a while. Then, they left the north of the city and met up with the winged cavalry. They brought along a large amount of purchased supplies and continued north. After another 3 days, Qing Lian came to visit. Your Highness, long time no see. I didn't expect Her Majesty and Her Highness to personally come here. May I know what's the matter? Perhaps I can be of some help. Qing Lian smiled when she saw Renbochin. Are you here to inquire about the news? Renbochin asked with a chuckle. That's right. Her Majesty brought the winged cavalry here, and many people are restless, Qing Lian said calmly. She had always been calm when talking to Renbochin. She had stayed at Black Bamboo Academy for a few months and knew Renbochin's temperament. It was better to be calm than to beat around the bush. Don't worry. It has nothing to do with you. I'm just borrowing the way. Renbochin tried to put Qing Lian at ease. Are you going to the area occupied by the imperial court? Qing Lian asked thoughtfully. You are quick to react. Renbochin immediately laughed. He had always admired Qing Lian. Is there anything we can do to help? Qing Lian asked directly. Although it's not in our territory, there are still some people we can mobilize. There's no need. You don't have to think too much, Renbochin said bluntly. Qing Lian then smiled and said, I'm not worried, but I reckon that many people will be restless if you go to the imperial court. It's useless even if I explain. Renbochin didn't care about what others thought. They had already packaged Dayo for him, and he couldn't be bothered to accept it. Why would he care about what others thought? Wasn't this the reason why the Empress brought the winged cavalry here? Qing Lian talked about other things and then gave Renbochin a map. It was a detailed map of Great Xia. Renbochin couldn't even get his hands on such a map, but Qing Lian gave it to him just like that. This greatly improved his impression of her. In fact, Qing Lian had already guessed what Renbochin and the Empress were here for. However, there were some things that she couldn't say. As long as it was as she thought, it had nothing to do with the Revolutionary Army or the imperial court. As for the fact that the Empress of Dayo brought the winged cavalry across the border, both the Revolutionary Army and the imperial court could only turn a blind eye to it. Even so, the Revolutionary Army still sent people to secretly follow them for the rest of the journey. It wasn't only them. Even some experts followed behind them to find out their purpose. The group of people followed them all the way to the border between the Revolutionary Army and the imperial court. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising slogans. Chapter 1088. Zihe Road was the front line of the confrontation between the imperial court and the volunteer army, and it was one of the most important towns in the hands of the imperial court. A young man in embroidered clothes was sitting in a residence in the city, listening to the reports from the people around him. In another hour, they will enter the city. The person who spoke had a cold and sharp voice. He was thin, had a fair face, and had no facial hair. Although he tried to speak gently, he still gave off a sinister feeling. I understand. I'll go and invite granduncle, the man said. After they left, the man sighed. A few years ago, Great Xia was still in its heyday, but it had fallen to such a state a few years later. Qi Zixiao was running amok in Great Xia with her army, and he and the others had to think of ways to persuade her. All of this stemmed from the repeated attacks on Dayo in the past, which resulted in repeated losses. Otherwise, the Xia family would have at least 100 years of luck. The man was called Xia Chuyang, and he was the son of the current King Liang, Xia Bailong. The person he wanted to invite was also called granduncle by Xia Bailong. He was the strongest spirit-will expert in the imperial family. 100 years ago, he had made a name for himself and was ranked in the top 50 of the world's most powerful experts. Later, he disappeared because of an incident. Many people thought he was dead, and even the princes didn't know of his existence. Now that Great Xia was about to collapse, he had to come out of seclusion to suppress the situation and the many people in the capital. 100 years ago, he was already in the top 50 of the world's most powerful expert. Now, he had improved further, and his strength was astonishing. No one knew to what extent, but after he came out of seclusion, he only went to a few places to suppress the turbulent capital. Many people guessed that he had already taken that step. This was also the source of the imperial family's confidence. In order to reach an agreement with Qi Zixiao, they specially came here to wait. Renbochin held Hua's hand and strolled along the long street with the Empress. Although this was an important town at the front line and the whole city was filled with uneasiness and tension, they could still feel the prosperity of this place. There were countless shops on both sides of the street, and merchants and travelers came and went. They finally felt a little of the prosperity of Great Xia in the past. The reason why the winged cavalry would enter the city within 2 hours was so that they wouldn't ruin the scenery of the city and disturb the family of 3 strolling around. Both sides of the long street were filled with ancient green trees, and the trees were covered with white flowers. A gust of wind blew past, and countless flower petals scattered down. It was as if this was not a part of the mortal world, and it was the beautiful scenery of this city. Renbachien and the Empress were enjoying the scenery while Erhua was busy stuffing the flying petals into her mouth. From time to time, she would stuff a petal into Renbachien's palm. Using the voice of a young girl, she said, "Delicious, sweet, try it, father." No matter how preoccupied the passers-by were, when they saw such a warm and childlike scene, they all smiled knowingly. If Honeysuckle was a little younger and didn't look like he was 8 or 9 years old, and his body wasn't a lot wider than others, it would be more fitting for the current situation. "It's delicious. Father, try it." Erhua stuffed a flying bug into Renbachien's hand. "It's delicious. Father, try it." Erhua grabbed another caterpillar from the tree trunk. Seeing that the things that Erhua gave him were getting more and more bizarre, Renbachien smiled helplessly and said, "I'm not hungry." "Mother, eat." Erhua turned her head and looked at the Empress expectantly. She stretched out her hand and held it tightly, afraid that the things in her hand would run away. These things were strange in Renbachien's eyes, but to her, they were the best things in the world. Naturally, she wanted to share them with her father and mother. Even someone as cold as the Empress felt a little helpless. With a smile on her face, she took a caterpillar that was the size of a pinky finger, had a back full of spikes, and had a black and red body. She threw it into her mouth. Then, she raised her eyebrows and said with some surprise, "It tastes pretty good. It's delicious." Erhua smiled even more brilliantly after receiving praise. Renbachien raised his head and looked at the people standing in front of him. Were they here to look for him? "Xia Chuyang greets Fairy Qi and Mr. Ren," the young man at the front raised his voice. He didn't mention their identities and didn't mention his own. He only addressed them as Mr. Fairy. Renbachien's eyes moved slightly as he knew the other party's identity. He whispered, "It's Great Xia's King Liang." Otherwise, the Empress wouldn't have known who the other party was. However, everyone's ears and eyes were sharp, so they naturally heard it clearly. The Empress didn't respond. Instead, she looked at the tall man behind Xia Chuyang, who was about 50 years old. She was slightly surprised that the Xia family actually had such a person. This was somewhat unexpected. "Why don't we go upstairs and talk?" Xia Chuyang smiled warmly when he saw the Empress's gaze. "Let's talk if you can take 3 moves from me. If you can't, there's no need to talk." The Empress's mind was firmly locked on the tall man. The corners of her mouth were slightly raised, and she seemed to be in a good mood. She didn't expect to find an expert from the heaven and earth region to test her skills. Xia Chuyang smiled. It was good that they could talk. As for 3 moves, he didn't expect Qi Zixiao to be so careless. With his granduncle's strength, it was hard to say who would take 3 moves from whom. An ordinary spirit will expert couldn't even take 1 move from him. The tall man was also full of fighting spirit as he said, "In that case, let's talk after we fight. However, if we go all out, this place will be destroyed. It's better to go outside the city." Xia Chuyang was a little surprised. He didn't expect his granduncle to say such words. Furthermore, his tone was completely like that of a peer. Could it be that Qi Zixiao could also reach that level? How old was Qi Zixiao? All right. The Empress carried Erhua in one hand and Renbachien in the other. In a few flashes, she arrived outside the city. During this time, she only took a few steps in the air. It was as if there was something invisible under her feet that she could use as leverage. She didn't touch the ground at all. Could she fly after reaching the longevity heaven stage? This thought suddenly popped up in his mind. He thought about it carefully. Although he didn't know much about it, judging from the Empress's performance, she probably hadn't reached this level yet. It should be the longevity Empress who used some kind of technique to achieve this effect within a short distance. The Empress left the two of them there and moved her feet to appear thousands of meters away. She stood with her hands behind her back and looked straight at the tall man who landed not far in front of her. King Liang and the other two people were on the city wall, staring down. Apart from King Liang, the other two were spirit will experts. They were also nervously watching the fight between the two of them. They might be able to learn something from watching a fight of this level. I didn't expect there to be someone like you in the Xia family. Who are you? The Empress asked instead of rushing to attack. Xia Yonghe, the tall man said. His aura surged, and the air around him began to distort. Long weapons rose from the ground, and in the blink of an eye, the area within 100 meters of him was filled with long spears that emitted murderous intent. As the name suggested, it was to open up a world and form a domain that was under one's control. It could be used to fight against enemies and greatly increase one's strength. Renbaqian was a little surprised when he saw this scene from afar. All along, there had been no detailed information about the opening of the heaven and earth domain, especially in Dayo. Therefore, he didn't know what kind of situation the heaven and earth domain would be like. Looking at the scene in front of him, he felt as if his spirit was projected into reality and could affect reality even more than the materialization of a heaven-grade weapon. If he guessed correctly, those countless long spears were probably real. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1089. In the face of Xia Yonghe's domain, the Empress moved her feet and appeared in the domain. The spears that she collided with shattered one after another. She raised her hand and threw a punch. It was a simple punch. Her fist was spotlessly white and looked like it was made of colored glass. It was extremely slow and heavy. Even Renbaqian, who was thousands of meters away, felt his mind being sucked by this punch. This is the real strength of the Empress after her breakthrough, Renbaqian thought to himself. It seemed like the Empress had used her physical strength to increase her strength during the test. This punch was completely incomparable to the one she used during the test. In the face of this punch, Xia Yonghe felt that this incomparably heavy punch seemed to have sucked his mind into it. Heaven and earth, Qi Zixiao, and everything else around him disappeared. All he could see was that incomparably clear punch that was filled with boundless power. Xia Yonghe didn't move. All the spears around him formed a black dragon in front of him. The dragon's head was in front of him, and its body was swung toward the sky. It was as if a dragon was lowering its head and extending its claws to press down. The fist and the black dragon's claws met. There was no sound. Instead, there was an invisible rebounding force that spread outward from the point of contact. The surrounding vegetation was swept away, and the broken grass, leaves, and branches formed a ring in the air that spread outward. Renbaqian's eyes flashed with astonishment. This world's martial arts had indeed exceeded his understanding. The Empress's gaze began to change. Her eyes were filled with a sense of distance and simplicity. Once again, she punched out. This time, her fist was no longer pure white. Instead, it had turned red. Tiny red runes with sparkling and translucent radiance covered her fist. If one didn't look closely, her fist would look like a ruby. Xia Yonghe's expression changed slightly. This punch gave him a completely different feeling from the previous one. He smelled an ancient and savage scent from this punch. He seemed to see the tribe killing ferocious beasts and sacrificing the fattest prey to the heavens. He seemed to see the tribe fighting with the ferocious beasts in order to survive. He saw the ferocious beasts letting out their final roars as their flesh and blood splattered in all directions. Xia Yonghe raised his hands, and the black dragon in the air struck out 3 times. Each strike produced a roar, the ground trembled, and cracks spread thousands of meters from his feet. After the 3rd strike, Xia Yonghe's face turned pale. At this moment, the Empress punched out again. Not only was her fist red, but the skin all over her body was also red. Behind her, a 10-meter-tall shadow appeared. It was blurry and indistinct, but one could barely make out the shape of a human. However, the savage aura on this human figure was even heavier. A fierce and barbaric aura directly pressed down on the hearts of everyone who saw this figure, causing fear to rise in their hearts. Even Ren Baqian was affected. It was as if he had seen an ancient savage traversing the river of time and appearing in the world. What is this? Who is this? Ren Baqian thought to himself. What a frightening aura. Even though the other party's figure was illusory and indistinct, Lin Fan could feel the tyrannical aura emanating from the other party. This aura was thousands of times stronger than that of the ancient race. Why would the longevity Heavenly Empress undergo such a transformation? Was it related to the divine soul like the creation of the heaven and earth region? That's not right. Although I don't know much, I can sense that it's not the soul. It seems to be something deeper. As for Erhua, she looked at the figure behind the Empress with a look of yearning. That kind of tyrannical aura wasn't a deterrent to her, but a goal. As the Empress punched out, Xia Yonghe's face turned pale. The black dragon roared at the sky and charged toward the Empress. Both parties were in a stalemate for a moment. The black dragon was covered in cracks from head to toe. Following which, it turned into fragments that filled the sky and flew into Xia Yonghe's forehead. Xia Yonghe flew backward and landed on the ground. His face was as white as a sheet of paper, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. The figure behind the Empress dissipated, and the red talisman fused into her skin. She said faintly, "You can't even take 3 of my punches. Go back and don't appear in front of me again." In 2 flashes, she appeared in front of Ren Baqian and disappeared with him. A moment later, the 3 of them appeared on another street. The Empress put the 2 of them down and said, "I didn't expect the Xia family to have such experts. It seems like they won't die anytime soon." Ren Baqian had a lot of questions in his mind. He turned his head and looked at the Empress. She stood there like a real fairy, and her whole body was full of an otherworldly aura. One had to know that those were experts who opened up the heaven and earth region. Including the Empress, there were currently only 3 people known to be alive. They couldn't even take 3 of her punches. After witnessing that scene and looking at the current Empress, she really looked like an immortal. It would be even better if she didn't have a nosebleed. Ren Baqian took out a piece of cloth from somewhere and handed it to the Empress. "Wipe it." The Empress didn't take the cloth from Ren Baqian's hand. She sniffed and sucked the blood back, not willing to waste a single drop. Ren Baqian felt that this action was like sniffing snot. Her previous outstanding style was completely gone now. "Is he injured?" Ren Baqian couldn't help but ask. "It will take some effort to seriously injure him in 3 moves," the Empress said simply. "He has also reached this stage. If he goes to the Emperor's tomb, he might get into trouble. Now, he will need at least a few months to recover," the Empress added. Ren Baqian nodded. No wonder the Empress was like this the moment they met. That's good too. With such an expert in the Xia family, they won't die anytime soon. If they really make an irresistible offer, it will be troublesome. It's better to let them fight. Ren Baqian laughed. Then, he said with some regret, "It's a pity for Qing Lian. If they were done fighting, maybe Qing Lian would come to Dao for shelter. But now, it seemed that the war in Great Xia wouldn't stop in a short period of time. I have to remind Su Qing and the rest to hide their whereabouts, lest they get wiped out by Xia Yonghe, Renbachien said after thinking for a while. Your Majesty, what was that behind you just now? Renbachien finally asked the question in his heart. It should be something like a bloodline imprint. The Empress said, it's an ancestral imprint that is passed down through the bloodline. When one reaches a certain level, he will be able to sense a trace of the ancestral imprint. So mysterious. Renbachien raised his eyebrows. However, thinking about it, the spirit, heaven-grade weapons, and the heaven and earth region were also very mysterious. This world seemed to be much more profound in this aspect than he had imagined. It's just a trace of imprint. According to my guess, it should be something that is purified from the bloodline after it has been refined to a certain level. It seems like it can reduce the number of detours. It seems. The scholar lives and the mimic dies, the Empress said simply. Renbachien immediately understood. Although awakening such a bloodline imprint could reduce the number of detours, it was also easy to be affected. Does everyone have it? Renbachien suddenly asked. I don't know. There are very few records about this. I only understood it after I reached this stage, the Empress said faintly. First, set a small goal, for example, 1 second. Chapter 1090. In the depths of the palace in Great Xia, a man's angry voice was heard. How dare Qi Zixiao? Brother, although she refused, the rebels have slowed down their attacks, Xia Chuyang said from below. Humph. They are afraid of you and are afraid of a life-and-death struggle. Emperor Xia snorted. We've achieved our goal, haven't we? Xia Chuyang said with a smile. As long as the rebels slowed down their attacks, the imperial court would recover after 2 to 3 years of recuperation. Although the imperial court only controlled 1/3 of the area, it was the most prosperous and affluent. As long as it recovered, there would be a chance of victory. It's a pity that you are greatly restricted. Otherwise, you could have killed all the rebel leaders and disintegrated them in an instant. Emperor Xiao's eyes flickered. Otherwise, the first thing he would have done after he came out of seclusion was to ask him to eliminate the rebel leaders instead of suppressing the capital. If it weren't for those aristocratic families. Emperor Xiao's face became gloomy again. If it weren't for them, he would have abandoned the prefectures in the south and allowed the bandits to invade. He would have lured them to the imperial city and gotten rid of them. Jiutang Mountain was a majestic mountain with overlapping peaks and winding paths. Looking from afar, the mountain peak was surrounded by clouds, which made it look even more magnificent. Renbachien walked on the mountain with Erhua in tow. From time to time, he would receive treasures from her, some strange bugs. Fortunately, Erhua had learned from her mistakes and recognized some stinky or unpalatable bugs. Now, the ones that she found tasty were the ones that tasted good. The mountain path was difficult, but it wasn't an obstacle for them as if they were walking on flat ground. If it weren't for Erhua running around, they would have been faster. Along the way, Erhua was quite liked by Lin Dong. She wore a string of jade pendants, jade talismans, and antiques that jingled as she walked. Renbachien estimated that the things on Erhua were worth at least hundreds of thousands of taels of silver. It had to be said that Jingtian's sect was indeed wealthy after thousands of years of inheritance. After walking on the mountain for 2 days, they saw a camp set up at the entrance of a valley. The valley was densely covered with colorful miasma. Li Yuanzhu and Lin Qiaola, as well as the higher-ups of Jingtian's sect, stayed here. Upon seeing the Empress, Li Yuanzhu's gaze froze. She then smiled and said, "Congratulations, fellow Daoist Qi." Even with Li Yuanzhu's calmness, she couldn't help but feel a little distracted when she sensed the Empress's breakthrough. The Empress nodded her head slightly and felt very happy. He had been ranked below her for so many years. Although part of it was due to him suppressing his strength, it was impossible for him not to have any thoughts about it. Now that he had broken through, when he looked back, the other party was already far behind him. His thoughts were clear, and he felt rather carefree. The little bit of unhappiness he felt in the past had also vanished. The tomb is within the valley and it is covered with poisonous miasma. Medicine will not be able to cure it. Every day, there will be 4 hours before and after noon for the miasma to subside. After today, we will rest for a day and continue to explore Decan's tomb tomorrow. Lin Dong said. The Empress had no objections. Get rid of those bugs that are following us, the Empress instructed the winged cavalry. Focus on driving them away. Ren Baqian added. He then pulled Hua over and warned her not to run into the valley. He also instructed a few guards to keep an eye on her. The winged cavalry was also divided into 2 groups. One group drove away the martial artists that were following them and went hunting. The other group inquired about the situation in the valley and set up camp here after knowing that this was the only path. Everyone rested for a night. The next day, the poisonous miasma in the valley gradually dissipated, and some people entered the valley. Although there was still poison, it was no longer a problem for everyone. The valley was winding, filled with strange stones and poisonous bugs. The trees on both sides were covered with pink flowers. If there was no poisonous miasma, it would be considered a beautiful scene. There was a road in the valley that was barren. After walking along the road for less than 15 minutes, they saw a poisonous pool. The water in the pool was dark green and lifeless. Nearby, there were dozens of white bones scattered in all directions. It seemed like they belonged to people who had been here before. The poisonous miasma is formed by the poisonous pool and the miasma after the flowers in the valley rot. Even if a spirit will expert were to fall into it for less than 45 minutes, his spirit would be infected like maggots in the tarsal bones. Lin Dong explained as he walked, afraid that the Empress would be careless. Although the Empress had already taken this step, the poisonous miasma in the valley was too difficult to deal with, and no one knew if she would be affected. It can even corrode the spirit. Ren Baqian was quite surprised. One had to know that the spirit belonged to the category of consciousness and was considered an illusory thing. How could the poison here be so powerful? Exactly. There are many strange things in the world. Lin Dong looked serious. Ren Baqian was deep in thought. It seemed like the poisonous miasma here was worth studying. One had to know that the effect of poison on spirit will experts was very small. Large doses of poison over a long period of time were needed to achieve the same effect on ordinary people. Spirit will experts who weren't strong enough weren't fools. If they weren't captured alive, they wouldn't be able to do it. If the poisonous miasma here could be studied, it might be useful in the future. Of course, this was just a preliminary idea. A spirit will expert could stay in the miasma for 45 minutes. In other words, the toxicity wasn't enough to threaten an expert. It was just a little strange. If the concentration was increased and injected into the body of an expert, the effect might be better. After turning around the poisonous pool, a wordless stone tablet stood in front of them. It was 3 feet tall and 4 feet wide. We can't go past this point. No matter where we go, we will come back. Li Yuanzhu nodded at the Empress, closed her eyes, and stepped forward. White mist rose behind the stone tablet. However, the white mist was confined to this small area, and it was impossible to see what was inside. After taking 2 steps, Li Yuanzhu's figure couldn't be seen from the outside. However, after a while, everyone saw her come out of the white mist with her eyes closed. Ren Baqian narrowed his eyes and saw that the position she was standing in was exactly the same as when she entered. It was just that she was facing the opposite direction. Li Yuanzhu opened her eyes and said, "This place is strange. My senses are completely restricted to my body and can't be released at all. Walking in it is like walking in water, and you will be pressured by the surroundings. An ordinary earth-will expert can only walk 3 times. I'll try." The Empress stepped forward after saying this. After taking a step, she felt as if she had entered something. The surrounding air was condensed and squeezed toward her. However, this kind of pressure had no effect on the Empress. She closed her eyes and felt her surroundings. Sure enough, she couldn't feel anything. Even Renbaqian and the others, who were 1 step away, couldn't feel anything. Furthermore, her senses couldn't be released at all. She couldn't see anything in front of her and couldn't hear anything in front of her. The Empress curled her lips and felt that this was interesting. She closed her eyes and took a few more steps. Every step she took seemed to shrink the ground to an inch. Suddenly, she felt as if she had stepped into a bustling city from a quiet and uninhabited mountain. The sounds of people, the wind, and the vegetation all entered her ears. A familiar aura also appeared in front of her. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, book house. Chapter 1091. It wasn't unexpected for the Empress to come back after entering the fog. Before anyone could say anything, the Empress took another step back into the fog, turned sideways, and threw a punch. If they were outside, this punch would be able to destroy the ground in a radius of several hundred meters in the air. However, the immense power dissipated in the air that was as viscous as water as soon as the Empress punched out. The Empress carefully sensed and could feel some fluctuations, like a stone thrown into the water, splashing out circles of ripples. She was testing the waters. However, to the Empress's surprise, the ripples caused by this punch spread in all directions. The ripples were chaotic, cancelled out each other, or staggered. She couldn't feel the real situation in her surroundings at all. The Empress exerted force with her feet, trying to create a crack to go forward. However, the force transmitted through the tip of her foot into the ground, and there was no movement at all. This wasn't unexpected. Li Yuanzhu, Lin Dong, and the others must have already tried these methods. If they were effective, they wouldn't be the ones to try them. Afterward, the Empress's body was covered with runes, and her aura rose steadily. However, the huge aura stopped spreading when it was 1 meter away from her body. However, the Empress didn't care. There were indeed some methods to limit power here. In her mind, the upper limit was the spirit wheel or cardinal heaven level. As long as this limit was exceeded, it could be broken. After all, this was left behind by the human emperor, and the highest the human race could reach in this world was longevity heaven and earth. After reaching this level, they couldn't advance any further. Therefore, the limit could only be here. Once it was exceeded, no one could break it, and whatever the human emperor left behind would be meaningless. Of course, there was another possibility, which was that this was simply a tomb that didn't want anyone to enter at all. However, whether it was the Empress, Li Yuanzhu, Lin Dong, Renbaqian, or the others, they didn't believe this was the case. Even ordinary human race experts had left behind a backup plan like the Temple of Heaven. Even though there were foreign races mixed in, and the Temple of Heaven had deviated from its original purpose for thousands of years, it was still a backup plan left behind by some experts for the human race. How could someone who was called the human emperor not leave behind something? How could he not hope for his descendants to return to the land where they were born, raised, and died? The land that was stained red with the blood of the human race. The tomb must contain the remains of a human emperor, so it must be opened by a descendant of the human clan. The Empress's entire body was blood red, and a gigantic figure appeared behind her. The Empress wanted to use brute force to break open this place. As the blood essence surged throughout his body, drop after drop of blood essence exploded within his body. The immense power contained within the blood essence poured into every cell in his body. It was like eating a Snickers bar. The Empress ferociously punched the air in front of her. The air didn't explode, and the smoke-like fog didn't sweep along with the wind generated by the punch. However, there was a slight caw sound in the air. It was as if this punch didn't hit the air, but hit something solid instead. Open. The Empress punched again. She even heard the sound of something cracking. Open for me, the Empress shouted coldly. Her strength was still as ferocious as ever. With this punch, the air was filled with cracks as if it was a solid object. The cracks were fine and dense, extending to every corner of the fog. With a crisp sound, the fog immediately shattered like glass. The Empress's huge blood essence also rushed into the sky. If the blood essence of an ordinary spirit will expert was a small stream, then the Empress's blood essence was a surging river. This shocked Li Yuanzhu, Lin Dong, and the people from Jingtian's sect. All the winged cavalry warriors who entered the valley looked at her with reverence. The fragments of the fog in the air fell to the ground and turned into real fog. They were absorbed into the stone wall in front of them and formed a door of fog. This change was beyond everyone's expectations, and they looked up one after another. Ren Baqian's eyes flickered. He originally listened to Li Yuanzhu and was prepared to use robots to explore the way. Now, it seemed that using robots wouldn't work. Someone had to truly reach the realm of longevity, heaven or heaven and earth. Otherwise, this maze wouldn't be broken, and the subsequent changes wouldn't happen. Although it was a door of fog formed by the fog on the stone wall, everyone believed that they would definitely be able to pass through it. Without this door, it would probably be extremely difficult to enter the tomb of the human emperor. Thousands of years ago, the ancestors of the human race had various skills, power, and understanding of this world far beyond what they had now. Just like the method of putting memories into the consciousness of others in the ancient tomb under the palace, no one knew how it was done. The Empress restrained her blood essence, put her hands behind her back, and walked to the door of fog to take a closer look. Just as Rinpoche was about to step forward, he realized that there seemed to be some changes to the wordless stone tablet. There are changes to the stone tablet. Rinpoche called out. The Empress, Li Yuanzhu, and Lin Dong came to the front of the stone tablet to take a look. Lines of words appeared from top to bottom. They were the words of Great Xia. The descendants of the human race are here. Kowtow 9 times and call their names 3 times. The fog will open and the door will appear. The corner of Rinpoche's mouth twitched, and he turned to look at Lin Dong and Li Yuanzhu. He saw that the two of them were in a daze after glancing at each other. Then, they looked away with baffled expressions and walked to the front of the stone door. The fog had been opened and the door had appeared. What was the point of showing this thing? You showed it before. Although the two of them didn't know how to kowtow, there were so many people in Jingtian's sect that they could just line up to kowtow. Could it be that these words will appear during the poisonous miasma? Rinpoche guessed, feeling inexplicably amused. That should be the case. Lin Dong nodded. If you can enter this place during the period of the poisonous miasma, you will see these words. When the poisonous miasma disperses, the words on it will also disperse. This is another way to enter, but I don't know where the cure for the poisonous miasma is hidden. Chief Lin, didn't you say that a spirit will expert can last here for 45 minutes? Didn't you guys come over and try? Rinpoche smiled faintly. I came in, but I didn't come here. During the poisonous miasma, there are other changes in this valley. It's not easy even for a spirit will expert to reach here. If you are not careful, you won't have the chance to return. Even if you manage to escape, your spirit will be damaged. Lin Dong shook his head slightly. When everyone arrived in front of the door, the Empress pressed her hand on it. Her palm slowly passed through the door and entered half of her arm. It can go through, the Empress said faintly. This was expected, but everyone also found it strange. After all, when the fog dispersed, everyone could see that this place was the same stone wall as other places. However, this door could actually go through, and they didn't know where it led to. This should be related to space, right? Renbachien was very surprised. Then, he followed the Empress and stepped into the door. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, book house. Chapter 1092. No one knew if there were any dangers behind the Yun Gate, but the Empress was confident in her own strength. Renbachien followed closely behind, but someone grabbed his collar. Li Yuanzhu retracted her 2 jade-like fingers, glanced at Renbachien with a faint smile, and followed behind the Empress. Next was Lin Dong. Renbachien looked to his left and right again. Seeing that no one was competing with him, he snorted and followed after them. He felt that he was being discriminated against. So what if you're a spirit will expert? Do weaklings have no human rights? With this resentment in mind, Renbachien turned around and instructed the others to retreat out of the valley if they didn't come out when the time was up. When he stepped into the cloud gate, he felt as if he had passed through a layer of water. A moist feeling enveloped his body, and when he stepped on solid ground, he went from day to night, temporarily blinding him. However, he didn't sense any danger. He could sense that the Empress, Li Yuanzhu, and Lin Dong were not far ahead. As he gradually adapted to the dim light, everything around him began to enter his eyes. They were standing on a protruding rock in the middle of a hollowed-out mountain. In front of them was a stone bridge about 6 meters wide. There was no guardrail, and it was pitch black below the bridge. They couldn't tell how deep it was, and they could only vaguely hear the sound of flowing water. The stone bridge was 100 feet long, and it led to a huge platform in the middle of the mountain. Below the platform was a rock pillar that extended into the bottomless darkness. The top of the stone pillar began to spread in all directions in an arc, like a big bowl. The light came from the braziers at the 4 corners of the platform. No one knew how long the raging flames had been burning. Judging from the time, it was at least several thousand years, and they still hadn't extinguished. The most eye-catching thing was the huge black shadow lying in the middle of the platform. It was 40 to 50 feet long and 10 feet tall. Its body was like that of a ravenous wolf, and its entire body was scarlet red. However, its head was that of a dragon's head. Its appearance was strange, and its eyes were tightly shut, as if it was in a deep sleep. It's Yazi. Lin Dong inhaled a deep breath of air and said. It is said that there is a Yazi under Dekan. This should be it. Renbachien's gaze moved slightly. Yazi. That Yazi who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. The kindness of a single meal must be repaid, and the grievance of a single stare must be avenged. A legendary creature. The second son of the dragon. When the legendary creature appeared in front of him, he felt a strange sense of alienation. However, this world even had Qilins and dragons. Previously, in the tomb under the palace, they had also seen the corpse of a soaring serpent, so it was not surprising that a dragon would appear here. After all, the owner of this tomb was a human emperor. But looking at its size, it wasn't something the fake Qilin in the imperial palace could compare to. They were both legendary creatures, but Qi Shui was so weak that it made people's hair stand on end. At most, it had the strength of a cardinal heaven expert. Could it be because it was too young? Qi Shui was about 50 or 60 years old, maybe he was still underage. Just like Lin Chaola. Or was it because in this land of exile, even the strength of these legendary creatures would be affected? Is it still alive? Renbachien asked softly, afraid that he would wake up the Yazi on the platform. From the looks of it, this thing should be the second level. He's already dead. There's no sign of life in his body. After the Empress finished speaking, she strode forward. Renbochin heaved a sigh of relief when he heard that he was dead. This legendary creature had such a huge body, and it seemed that its combat power was not low. In particular, it was still guarding the platform. It would be troublesome if it accidentally fell during the battle. After heaving a sigh of relief, Renbochin felt that it was a pity. Deacon definitely didn't let the Yi guard here to eat everyone who came in. With the strength of the longevity heaven, the Empress might be able to pass. If this Yi was brought out alive, it would be a great fighting force. However, after being washed away by the river of time, the legendary Yi was now just an empty shell. Renbochin walked forward and carefully sized up this huge creature that was 3 meters tall even when it was lying down. Even though it was dead, he could still feel the ferocity and fierceness of its body, mainly because of the pressure of its huge body. However, he could see a trace of calmness on its face. He didn't know how long it had been guarding here, but the descendant that the human emperor had been waiting for didn't come. There was no unwillingness, reluctance, or unbearable loneliness. It was as if it was peacefully following its master in its sleep. Renbochin couldn't help but reach out to touch it. As an earthling, it would be strange if he didn't want to touch such a creature. It didn't turn into ashes like the flying serpent. It felt cold and hard as if touching wood and stone. Let's go. The Empress stopped in front of the corpse of the Yi for a moment before stepping on the stone bridge behind it. The others didn't have Renbochin's strange and regretful feelings. In their opinion, this was just a kind of ferocious beast. At most, it was more powerful when it was alive, and its master was more amazing. At the end of the stone bridge were 2 tall stone doors with a map-like pattern painted on them. It's the map of Ansu. Lin Dong identified it and then added, Ansu is the area under the control of Decan. I remember that there are 237 areas, and the human race controls 10. D can only control one area of Ansu. Renbochin asked curiously. There were only 5 human emperors in total. Could it be that Decan was a weaker human emperor? Ansu is the birthplace of the human race and the most prosperous place at that time, Lin Dong explained. Didn't you only know a little after lifting the coffins of your ancestors? How do you know so much now? Renbochin asked, full of doubt that Renbochin was hiding a lot of things. He was the one who found Decan's tomb, knew that the Yi was a ferocious beast under Decan, and even knew about Ansu. He didn't know how much he didn't say. It was really puzzling that Lin Dong knew so many things. Lin Dong was silent for a while and said in a strangely calm tone, when I go back, I will lift all the coffins of my ancestors. This time, even Li Yuanzhu couldn't help but look at him with surprise in her eyes. Even if your ancestors knew a little, only the first 2 generations of ancestors would know, right? Renbochin was stunned for a moment before continuing. Over the past thousands of years, more than one tomb has been discovered. Occasionally, there will be some discoveries left behind by the ancestors, Lin Dong said indifferently. Your ancestors dug up graves for no reason. Now you even dug up their graves. Sure enough, those who dug up people were dug up. Renbochin had a strange look on his face and didn't know where to start. There were too many things to complain about. If your ancestors knew that you were like this, they would probably strangle you at first sight. However, after thinking about it carefully, Renbochin and the others weren't much better. Weren't they digging up the tomb of the human emperor? Renbochin gave him a thumbs up and didn't speak anymore. The Empress pushed the stone door twice, but it didn't budge. She exerted all her strength, surged her blood, and a shadow appeared behind her before slowly pushing the stone door open. It revealed a stone room with a radius of more than 30 meters. A burly man in metal armor was sitting in it. Just as the Empress was about to step forward, she suddenly looked incredulous and cried out, "There is vitality in his body. Is Deacon alive?" Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, book house. Chapter 1093. There's vitality in his body. Is Deacon still alive? The Empress stared in disbelief at the figure in the stone room. Her and Lin Dong's facial expressions changed. The person in the stone room gave off an extremely dangerous feeling. Both of them could feel the pressure coming from the person's body. It was like a volcano that could erupt at any moment and turn everything in front of it into ashes. However, there was a sense of lifelessness to this oppression. The other party's body retained its strength, but not its vitality. However, a palm-sized area near his heart contained a faint trace of vitality and a huge amount of qi and blood that emitted light and heat like the sun, burning and boiling everything. The trace of vitality was hidden in this huge amount of qi and blood. Unlike ordinary people, the qi and blood of ordinary people were constantly emitting vitality. It was contained in every drop of blood and every cell. However, the vitality in the body in front of him was very little. There was only a trace of it, and it was swimming in the huge qi and blood that was like a scorching sun. It was like a fish swimming in water, using this trace of vitality to activate the huge mass of qi and blood, so that it would not dissipate after death like a normal creature. It was this trace of vitality that shocked the Empress. Ren Baqian was completely stunned. Alive? After all, it had been 5,000 years since the human race was driven to this place. In other words, this deacon had lived for 5,000 years. Boom! It was as if a dull drum had exploded in the sky and pounded on everyone's hearts. This was the heartbeat of the body in front of them. With this heartbeat, the huge amount of qi and blood flowed through Deacon's body like a river that had opened the floodgates. After circulating all over his body, it returned to his heart. This time, even the other parts of his body emitted traces of vitality as if they were alive. This made the Empress subconsciously stand in front of Ren Baqian and be on guard. However, as time passed, this trace of vitality gradually dissipated. Deacon's body returned to its lifeless state, with only a trace of vitality and a huge amount of qi and blood lingering in the small space around his heart. Everyone at the entrance of the stone room was silent and stared at Deacon, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. What's going on? Is the Emperor still alive? Ren Baqian asked carefully. Yes, there's still a trace of vitality in his body. A mass of qi and blood is gathered in one place, the Empress said softly. What do we do now? Should we burn some incense and paper and say that we are here to pay respects to the Emperor? Ren Baqian's mind was racing. This situation was too shocking. If the other party were to wake up and find out that they were here to open his coffin, would he be angry? Cult Master Lin, didn't your patriarch's coffin mention this situation? How long can a human emperor normally live? Ren Baqian couldn't help but ask. Lin Dong could not be bothered with the first half of his sentence, but he did reply to the second half. I don't know. But it definitely won't live for 5,000 years. Ren Baqian carefully sized up Deacon, who was sitting cross-legged. From his appearance, Deacon seemed to be in his 40s or 50s. He had a majestic body and a dignified face. She was wearing a set of grayish-black metal armor. The front part of her body looked like the head of a strange beast, and the bottom part was a battle skirt. Even after thousands of years, there was not a single speck of dust on her armor, and it emitted a faint light. Beside him was a huge double-edged battle axe, the surface of which was as big as a door. From the looks of it, this human emperor was similar to the ancient race in that he focused on cultivating his physique. In Ren Baqian's opinion, the main difference between the aboriginals and the other nations was the physical and soul cultivators. The former focused on blood essence and strengthened the body. The latter focused on essence and strengthened the soul. It was obvious that Deacon was a physical cultivator. Deacon's right hand touched the ground lightly. Upon closer inspection, one could see that he had written 8 words on the ground with his fingers. With my broken body, I will protect the human race. Seeing these words, Rinpoche felt as if he had been struck in the heart. An indescribable complex emotion rose from the bottom of his heart. It was as if he had seen the bloody battles of the human race, the human emperor protecting millions of humans, and the sad song of the human race from thousands of years ago. The weight of these 8 words and the emotions contained in them made him sigh faintly. From these 8 words, one could understand the person in front of him. The Empress's eyes flickered as she was struck in the heart by these 8 words. Only such a person could be called the emperor of the human race. Compared to him, she was still a little bit inferior. Bowing to the other party was the greatest etiquette of the aboriginals. The words left behind by the human emperor had taught her the biggest lesson of all. The human emperor is already dead, the Empress said faintly as if she had understood something. However, she changed the name of Decan to human emperor. This is the broken body he left behind. After saying this, the Empress took 3 steps forward. Suddenly, her surroundings turned dark, and she felt as if she was standing in a void. 3 meters in front of her stood a majestic man in armor with his hands behind his back. His eyes were like the starry sky, and he seemed to be looking at her or something else. "Junior, my broken body can still be used to help you," Deacon said. "The opportunity is in the Spirit Sword Mountain." With just these 2 sentences, Decan's figure turned into countless light spots and flowed into the Empress's sea of knowledge. Knowledge from Decan flowed into the Empress's memory. The Empress felt as if she was floating on the sea and being swept by a storm. After an unknown amount of time, the storm subsided, and the waves calmed down. When she recovered, she felt a familiar person tugging at her. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." The Empress turned her head and saw that she was still in the stone room with Rinpoche beside her. He looked a little anxious, and when he saw her looking over, he heaved a sigh of relief. Lin Dong and Li Yuanzhu were also looking at her. "How long have I been standing?" the Empress asked. "In the time it takes to drink a cup of tea." Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. Just now, after taking 3 steps forward, she suddenly stood there in a daze for a full 5 minutes, which shocked him. What exactly happened? The Empress rubbed her forehead and said, "I obtained some things left by the Emperor." She turned to look at Decan and bowed again. Then, she placed her palm on Decan's forehead and vibrated her sea of knowledge to form a certain frequency to connect with Decan's body according to the contents of the knowledge left by Decan. After a while, the Empress felt as if there were a few lines connecting her and Decan's body. As the Empress thought about it, Decan suddenly moved his fingers. Although the movement was very small, it couldn't be hidden from everyone, and they were immediately shocked. The Empress knew that this was all she could do at present. According to the knowledge in her mind, she needed some time to truly control Decan's body. Then, she waved at everyone and said, "Don't be nervous." Looking at Decan's body, the Empress slowly said with admiration, "The Emperor knows that the longer we stay in this land of exile, the weaker the human race will be and the harder it will be to fight against the foreign races. Therefore, he burned his spirit and refined his body into a weapon that can reach up to 70% of his strength and can be used 3 times. Following the Empress's words, the other 3 were stunned. They looked at the Emperor who was sitting cross-legged and then at the 8 words on the ground. All of them were moved. "With my broken body, I protect the human race." Calm. Miao Shu Wu. Chapter 1094. Everyone stayed in the valley for half a month, and the Empress went to Decan's tomb every day. Half a month later, a tall figure in a long robe appeared behind the Empress. It was the body of the human Emperor Can. He could use 70% of Decan's strength 3 times. This was the last weapon the human Emperor had left behind for his descendants. It was his own body. He had paid a huge price for this by burning his spirit and vanishing into thin air. There was no possibility of reincarnation. All this was for his descendants to leave this land of exile one day. This was the glimmer of hope left by the human emperor. With the strength of the human emperor, even if he could only use 70% of it, it was still a huge fighting force that would allow the human race to resist when facing a formidable enemy. At least for Rinpoche and the others, the foreign races that they were most worried about in 10 to 20 years weren't invincible. As long as they could buy some time, the more time they had, the stronger the power they could use would be. This was the emperor of the human race, and even the Empress had great respect for him. In addition, there were many other things that were obtained from the tomb of the human emperor. There was some knowledge about the 237 regions of the Lonsang territory, as well as the techniques of the human emperor Kan. The 237 regions were known as the 10,000 races. According to their strength, there were only 36 powerful races, known as the upper 36 races. One of these races was the herdsman that they had seen before, the acceptance-ling race. There were 369 middle-level races, including the human race. The Thunder Barbarians, Negu, Ba Bai, Tian Sun, Bai Xiang, Su, and other races that Rinpoche had seen in the 60,000 mountains were all here. The human race was the only race with the strength of a middle-level race that could compete with or even surpass the superior races. As for the inferior and weak races, there were countless of them. Most of them were vassals of other races and had low combat power. There were at least a few thousand races. In fact, according to the strength of an ordinary individual, the human race was considered an inferior race. However, in the past millions of years, there were countless geniuses among the human race who were able to shine brightly in the history of the human race. Some of them, such as D. Kan, were able to fight against the top-grade experts from the top-grade clans. Therefore, the human race was classified as one of the 369 middle-grade clans. As for D. Kan's technique, it was also one of the strongest techniques of the ancient human race, the Great Sun technique, which could be practiced to the body realm. The body realm was the realm above the heaven and earth realm and the immortality realm. There was no difference in terms of physical cultivation or soul cultivation. Apart from these 2 points, there were some other things. There were 2 things that caught people's attention the most. One was Spirit Sword Mountain. In the words that Deacon left behind, the opportunity was in the Spirit Sword Mountain. However, other than that, the Empress searched through the things that Deacon left behind, but there was no news about the Spirit Sword Mountain. What everyone knew was that the Sword Master's Spirit Sword came from Spirit Sword Mountain. However, no one knew where the Spirit Sword Mountain was, what the Spirit Sword Mountain was like, and how the Spirit Sword Mountain was formed. All of these were hidden in the fog. Apart from that, there was also a map without any explanation. However, everyone knew that Emperor Kan would not leave behind something worthless. This map must contain something of great value. Some people guessed that it was the tomb of an expert, some guessed that it was a powerful treasure, and some thought that it was a secret manual. These things seemed to be valuable, but the first 2 didn't make sense. Given D. Kan's status, he wouldn't leave a map in his memory. It was just about these things. The last possibility was that when the human race left their homeland, they might have hidden some things. However, thousands of years had passed, so it was unknown whether those things still existed. Of course, this was only a possibility. As for what exactly it was, perhaps only by deciphering the location of that map could they find out. When Decan's remnant body walked out of the valley with the Empress, it meant that the matter of the Emperor's tomb had come to an end. The harvest from this trip was huge, and the most valuable was the situation in the Kanglan region, Decan's martial arts, and Decan's remnant body. However, there were also 2 huge mysteries. One was the Spirit Sword Mountain, and the other was that inexplicable map. Do we need someone to guard this valley? Ho Dajiang asked. Forget it, there's nothing left in it. The Empress turned her head to look at the valley and shook her head. Even Decan's remnant body had been taken away by him, so there were no more secrets in this valley. As for Yazi's corpse, it was also carried out of the mountain. Renbachien was very interested in this thing and wanted to bring it back for someone to examine. On the way back, the Empress was very silent, while Renbachien tried to find the location of that map. If the location of that map wasn't in the 237 square kilometers of the Kanglan region, then it should be somewhere along the human race's route to the land of exile. It would be best if he could restore that route, but if he couldn't, he would find the general route and then follow the map. In any case, as long as there was a slight possibility of finding it, he had to try. Somewhere in a small town in Great Xia, there were many sword-wielding martial artists these days. There weren't many inns in the town, but now, almost all of them were full and there weren't any guest rooms. There were even some people who simply turned into guests and stayed in the homes of some commoners or even wealthy families. With so many martial artists, there were naturally some bloodshed. Perhaps it was due to verbal conflicts, or perhaps it was due to a long-standing hatred, but almost every morning, a few corpses could be found in the corners of the streets and alleys. For a time, the town was in chaos. A few days later, there was a huge battle in the mountains outside the town. Hundreds of martial artists were fighting over an ancient secret scroll. In the past thousands of years, ancient secret scrolls would appear from time to time, and every time they appeared, it would cause a reign of terror. This time, because there were no spirit will experts, the fight was even more tragic. Two figures appeared in the dark and watched the fight below. One of them was Du Lao Lu. On one hand, he was paying attention to the fight below, and on the other hand, he was busy massaging the shoulders of a beautiful lady sitting on a rock. Du Lao Lu only jumped out from the darkness when the fight for the upper hand was about to end. He laughed exaggeratedly and said, "This book is fated with me. Leave the secret manual behind and leave quickly. Do you think you can still keep your lives?" Everyone was at the most critical moment of the fight, and suddenly, a fellow who wasn't even at the earth will level jumped out and spoke nonsense, causing everyone to curse. Du Lao Lu sneered and shouted, "Wifey, go." Following Du Lao Lu's words, a graceful figure crossed a distance of hundreds of meters and joined the fight. A moment later, Du Lao Lu beamed with joy as he received the secret scroll that the lady threw at him. After touching it a few times, he immediately curled his lips and said, "It's not this. Wifey, you got it wrong again." The lady raised her eyebrows and slapped him. "Are you blaming me?" "Sorry, it's all my fault." Du Lao Lu immediately lowered his head. "Wifey, are you tired?" After a while, he happily boasted, "In any case, I have already obtained Yagui's true teachings, and those things in the school are useless. Now that I can fly freely in the vast sea and sky, it's better to find it slowly." Baidu Search 881 Chinese Network. No advertising words. Chapter 1095. Why is there no location on this map left by Decan? Why didn't Decan leave more information about Spirit Sword Mountain? Renbachien muttered to himself in doubt. If Decan wanted people to find the location of the map, why didn't he leave any information? Since Decan said that the opportunity was at Spirit Sword Mountain, why didn't he leave the location of Spirit Sword Mountain? It wasn't like he said to the world, "Do you want my treasures? If you want them, go to the sea and look for them. I put them all there." If he didn't want others to find it, why did he leave the map and point out Spirit Sword Mountain? At that time, only the Empress got the information. Renbachien, Li Yuanzhu, and Lin Dong didn't get it. In other words, only Longevity Heaven could get it, or there was only one successor. In this case, there was no need to be secretive. Or was there a secret in these two places, just like the human race, where information about the Kanglan domain couldn't be left behind? Even if there were unknown restrictions, there was an agreement. The ancestors of the human race tried to leave behind all kinds of information about the Kanglan domain, and the Emperor tried to leave behind a lot of information about the Kanglan domain. Could it be that the Emperor didn't know where Spirit Sword Mountain was? Could it be that Spirit Sword Mountain was on the map? Renbocchen thought about it and felt that this was the most likely possibility. If this was the case, how did Deacon know that the opportunity was at Spirit Sword Mountain? Judging from the things left by Deacon, the opportunity here should be the opportunity for the human race to leave the land of exile. Deacon must know something, but he didn't leave any useful information. With these doubts, Renbocchen and the Empress returned to the imperial capital. As soon as they returned to the palace, the Empress lay down on the bed without a care for her image. Your Majesty, every emperor has his own path. Not all emperors are the same. Renbocchen calmed himself down, lay down beside the Empress, and looked at her sideways. The Empress was cold, not taciturn. Although it sometimes looked like it, it was actually completely different. Renbocchen knew that the Empress was a little troubled after seeing Deacon. He also knew what was bothering her. The Empress let out a long and seemed a little dispirited. Some emperors are the rulers of development, some are the rulers of conservation, and some are the rulers of prosperity. Your Majesty, guess which one are you? The Empress glanced at him. Naturally, it's the Emperor of Expansion and Prosperity. Ha! Renbocchen laughed. Do you have any objections? The Empress's eyes were filled with danger. Of course not. I've said it before, His Majesty is an emperor throughout the ages. At present, Dayo had just started to develop. In the next few decades, Dayo would develop to a level that no one could imagine. Those who couldn't keep up with this development would be eliminated. The development of the past few decades was much greater than the development of the previous few thousand years. His Majesty will be eulogized by future generations. What's there to be troubled about, Your Majesty? Renbocchen asked in a light tone. After a long time, the Water Empress said, That's right. After saying this, the Empress seemed to be in a better mood. There will be a test flight tomorrow. Does Your Majesty want to go and take a look? Renbocchen asked again when he saw that she seemed to have calmed down. Of course I have to go, the Empress replied without hesitation. Following which, she said softly, I'm hungry. The food on the road was naturally not as delicious as the ones in the palace. More importantly, the 4 corned cows that she brought with her had already been eaten in the valley. For the rest of the month, she hadn't eaten her fill. The consumption of ordinary ingredients was too high for the Empress to eat her fill. It had to be said that this was a sad story. What do you want to eat? I'll instruct the Imperial Kitchen. Hot pot. Instruct the Imperial Kitchen to prepare 500 kilograms of meat slices for the hot pot with a diameter of 3 meters. The new campus of the Black Bamboo Academy was located in the northeast of the capital, between the 3rd and 4th Ring Roads. It occupied an area of more than 6,000 square meters and had a reserve area of more than 3,000 square meters. It could be called the largest academy in the world. It had the largest number of laboratories in the world, including biology, chemistry, physics, and so on. There were more than 8 physics laboratories. This included 8 grades and more than 2,000 students. There was also a full-time teaching staff, 1 person, this number was pitifully small. Fortunately, there were dozens of robots and senior students who were teaching the junior students. Otherwise, the Black Bamboo Academy would have the weakest teachers in the world. In addition, the Sword Master would also come to teach the senior students from time to time. With the Sword Master's learning ability, knowledge, and combat power, he was competent enough. Combat power was especially important for teaching here. The test flight of the plane was held in the experimental park of the Black Bamboo Academy, and there were 2 runways. When Renbochin arrived, not only were the undergraduate students here, but some experts and the sword master from the Mount Zhongshe laboratory were also here. While waiting, a white man with a big nose came to Renbochin's side and said in half-baked Mandarin, "Your Highness, we need to build an observatory by the sea. This world is too wonderful, and we need more information. We may have discovered a huge secret that is simply incredible. You can't imagine how surprised we were when we realized this." His name was Claude, and he was a famous physicist on Earth. Of course, that was in the past. After coming to this new world, the seemingly taciturn Claude burst out with great enthusiasm and went to the laboratory. This was the first time that he had taken the initiative to ask Renbochin for something and revealed his nature as a chatterbox. "What secret?" Renbochin asked curiously. "Of course, it's a secret." Claude winked at Renbochin. "If I tell you, it won't be a secret anymore." "Hee hee." Renbochin laughed. "Someone, drag him away and let him know the consequences of being mischievous." "Oh, no, 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 let go of me. It's not that I want to hide it from you, but it's just a guess at the moment, and I need more information to prove it," Claude hurriedly shouted. "I'm also very interested in guesses." Renbochin got someone to let go of him, personally straightened his collar, and then slapped him on the shoulder. "Tell me, what did you discover?" "Eastern barbarians." Claude mumbled as he covered his shoulder. He then looked at Renbochin and said seriously, "This is a very, very important guess. At present, there's no more evidence, so it's just a guess. If it turns out that the guess is wrong, it's normal in research, and you can't blame us for it." "No problem." Renbochin was supportive of Claude's desire to live. "All right, I'm going to tell you now." "Don't be too surprised," Claude said while looking at Renbochin. Renbochin felt that Claude still needed to be taught a lesson. He was so mischievous and could easily get beaten up. "There are 2 moons in this world, and one of them might be fake." Renbochin widened his eyes in disbelief and asked, "Are you serious?" Chapter 1096. Are you telling the truth? Yes, no. Is the moon real or fake? Fake, real. Is it real or fake? F***ck, it's really fake. Are you messing with me? F***ck, I hate Chinese. The above was pure nonsense, and it didn't happen. Although Claude's Chinese wasn't very good, Renbochin could still understand what he was trying to say. The moon is fake. Renbochin felt incredulous. There were 2 moons in this world, one yellow and one red. They rose opposite each other and reflected each other's radiance. Both were bigger than the moon on Earth. He had been in this world for so long, but never thought that one of the moons in this world was fake. This conjecture was really frightening. Why do you have such a conjecture? Based on the size of this planet, the distance from the moon, the strength of gravity, and the tides, if these 2 moons are real, the dry and rainy seasons won't be as distinct as they are now. The tides are also completely different, and the rotation of the planet should be slower instead of being closer to Earth and rotating 24 hours a day. Claude gave Renbochin a variety of explanations based on the size of the planet, the angle of the shadow, the observed distance from the moon, the change of the seasons, and the tides of the lake. Although Renbochin was confused most of the time, he understood one point. Based on the current situation, one of the moons was fake. Otherwise, the rotation of the planet would be nearly stationary, the tides would be almost non-existent, the seawater would flow to the poles, the 4 seasons wouldn't change, and the region where Dayo was located wouldn't even have the change of the rainy and dry seasons. Of the 2 planets, one of which only looks like the moon, is actually very small, and has almost no impact on the planet. That's why this situation occurred. Of course, this is only a conjecture based on the data collected so far. The timing and situation require tidal observations and astronomical observations to obtain more data to obtain evidence, Claude said at the end. Although he said this, his expression and voice showed his confidence in his conjecture. This was the pride of a top student. Everyone in the research institute was a top student, but Claude was sure that he was the top student. Even if the person in front of him had the power to decide his life and death, in terms of professionalism, he had always looked down on him. What equipment do you need? Give me the list, set up the observation station immediately, and give me a conclusion as soon as possible, Renbochin said sternly. After he finished speaking, he couldn't help but look up at the sky and was almost blinded by the dazzling light. The sun was very strong today. However, no matter how hot the sun was, it was not as influential as Claude's words. If there was a fake moon in the sky, then what was that moon? An alien spaceship? Or something else? Since the beginning of history, there had always been 2 moons in this world, and they had never changed. What was that thing hanging in the sky for thousands of years? In Renbochin's mind, the real situation of the moon had risen to become the most important thing and was more important than the foreign races. The true appearance of the moon affected the entire world. After receiving this news, he was a little absent-minded as he looked at the experimental aircraft. Watching them inspect, watching them launch, watching them move forward, watching them crash into the wall, this was already the 3rd flight test. It was also the 3rd time he hit the wall. The aircraft took off, but due to the short distance and low altitude, half of the aircraft scraped against the wall and tumbled out. Fortunately, a white shadow flashed by before the aircraft crashed, and Tong Lan, the pilot, jumped out. This situation was very dangerous for ordinary people, but it wasn't a big risk for warriors, who had speed, reaction, and strength that far exceeded ordinary people by more than 10 times. Our materials are still too heavy. We need lighter and stronger metals, Shurgan reported to Renbochin. Well, you guys continue. I hope to see results as soon as possible. After this is done, all of you will be the first people in Dayo in space. Renbochin encouraged Shurgan and the others before leaving in a hurry. Why is Yagüe acting weird today? He seems to have something on his mind, a student asked curiously. This was an airplane, the most important project of the academy at present. However, it seemed like Yagüe didn't pay much attention to it. He was fine before, but he became like this after that foreigner spoke to Yagüe. In any case, this takeoff test was a failure. It's natural for Yagüe to find it hard to raise his spirits. We need to come up with something better. As long as we come up with a plane that can really fly, we can have glory, money, and power. Shurgan waved his hand and said to everyone. Nonsense. You have already brought out a steam car and a tractor. Why don't I see those things you mentioned? Someone immediately exposed him. There will be in the future. Shurgan was outstanding in his ideological work, at least in terms of empty promises. Pfft. However, everyone knew that these things were going to be their future experiences. Furthermore, by participating in it, their progress, vision, knowledge, and practical ability would be far superior to ordinary people. You were absent-minded just now. What happened? The Empress asked after they left the Black Bamboo Academy. Yesterday, Renbochin consoled her, but today, it was her turn to ask him. These days, things were always happening one after another. Renbochin thought about it and decided to tell the Empress. One of the moons in the sky might be fake. Oh. The Empress replied faintly. Don't you find it strange? Renbochin couldn't accept the Empress's indifferent reaction. Did she know what it meant to have a fake moon? If the moon was fake, it meant that there were people in this world who could create a fake moon in the sky. This wasn't something that could be achieved by humans. In other words, there were aliens in this world who hung a plate in the sky to play with you and watch you fight to death on the ground. Well, Your Majesty, you really don't know. Renbochin rubbed his head. The Empress didn't know much about this. If it's fake, what's in the sky? The Empress asked. I don't know. Renbochin spread his hands. This was the problem. Then, just figure out what's in the sky. The Empress's words were simple and straightforward. Renbochin thought for a while and asked, do you want to go to the moon and take a look? It's not from here, it's from Earth. Now, the base on the moon has been completed and is operating successfully. Now that Earth had begun to establish a base on Mars, landing on the moon was naturally a very simple task. Okay, the Empress readily agreed. She had long known that the planet was round, and she could finally see it with her own eyes. Chapter 1097. In the northwest of China. A huge building stood in the Gobi Desert. A large number of staff were entering and exiting the building. From above, it looked like busy worker ants going in and out of an ant's nest. At this moment, a silver-white rocket-shaped aircraft was ejected from the ground. It accelerated along the curved vacuum pipe at 4 times the speed of sound and was ejected into the sky from the opening above the building. This was an electromagnetic acceleration that catapulted the aircraft to a high altitude and then propelled by nuclear power. In fact, the fact that Earth could put controllable nuclear fusion into use was inseparable from Renbochin's support for Earth's technology industry. In the history of the development of materials science and aviation technology, Renbochin had left a heavy mark. History would remember Renbochin's contributions, the country would remember his contributions, and the people would remember his contributions. The above statement was pure nonsense. However, it was indeed related to Renbochin. In the past 30 years, Renbochin had brought back some items from Dayo from time to time and combined them with Earth's technology to promote the development of a variety of technologies. These included a few new materials. One of them was an ion control device that was molded into a high-temperature resistant metal, which solved a major problem that had plagued Earth's technology for decades. At this time, Renbochin and the Empress were sitting side by side in the aircraft. Ren Xia was not far from them. In addition to the 3 of them, there were 31 other passengers. The seats were located in the hall of the aircraft. There were 34 seats on 2 floors that were distributed in a ring shape against the wall. The center was empty. When the huge centrifugal force disappeared from the body, a broadcast was heard from the aircraft, informing everyone that the aircraft had entered a stable forward state and could move without gravity according to the previous training. Due to the popularization of martial arts, the physical fitness of people on Earth was several times stronger than before. In addition, with the advancement of aviation technology, people who previously needed a lot of training to fly could now do it with very little training. For example, the Empress and Renbochin didn't undergo any training at all. They were only told what to do before they boarded the aircraft. Everything was possible with money. Of course, the other passengers were also rich. Even now, landing on the moon was still a technological sport that only the rich could come into contact with. As soft and soothing music sounded, everyone unfastened the fasteners on their bodies. There was no gravity in the aircraft. After unfastening the fasteners, they would float in the opposite direction with a little force. It's a wonderful feeling. After the Empress finished speaking, she closed her eyes and felt the weightlessness. Along with the music, a man and a woman in their 30s slowly danced in the air. It was unknown if they had been planning this for a long time or if they were suddenly motivated by their emotions. However, this was indeed a pretty good experience. There were even others who were influenced and joined in. Although the space was large enough, it was difficult for ordinary people to control their movements and directions in the weightlessness. They would bump into each other from time to time, and they would only smile at each other. In this kind of atmosphere, even the most irascible person would calm down, let down his guard, and become gentle. As the passengers joined in, the music in the cabin changed. A female voice rang out among the crowd, singing in a voice that sounded like an aria. "I was born here, but I don't know this place." What was the reason for the sunlight to illuminate the city and the growth of all living things? If it weren't for the embrace of the earth, we would have long disappeared in the vast universe. There was a woman in the crowd with her fingers clasped tightly in front of her chest and a smile on her face. Everyone quickly realized that this was a program arranged by the Moon Landing Company. As the song went on, the smiles on everyone's faces became brighter and their gazes became gentler. Through the glass of the cabin, they could see the sea of stars and the blue earth outside. Everyone was outside of Earth and in the boundless universe. An indescribable feeling came from the sea of stars, the song, and the people around them. It spread to everyone's heart. After the song ended, it changed to a lighter song. Renbochin held the Empress's hand and leaned against the window of the cabin. From there, he could see the boundless starry sky outside. The sea of stars is the ultimate romance of mankind, Renbochin said to the Empress with a smile. Now that they were here, the pressure brought about by the possible attack of the foreign races and the mystery left behind by the human emperor had been greatly alleviated. "It's indeed beautiful." The Empress looked at the stars in the distance and smiled. Then, she held Renbochin's hand and walked in the air step by step without any gravity. The Empress's movements surprised everyone, and they couldn't help but suspect that she was walking on glass. Everyone looked at the Empress in amazement, and even the female singer widened her eyes. She had performed many times in the aircraft, but had never seen anyone who could do this. Even the most professional astronaut couldn't do it. Renbochin didn't feel surprised, but he was a little sad. He was like a human kite being led by the Empress. "I don't want to lose face. Oh my God, I saw a fairy." In a cabin at the front of the aircraft, two astronauts were shocked when they saw the image on the monitor. "How did she do it?" "I feel like she's walking on Earth. If I hadn't run back and forth 13 times, I would have tried to see if I could do it like her." After 37 hours, the aircraft finally landed on the moon. From the window, they could already see the base not far away. The outside was covered by a layer of special curved glass that could filter sunlight. Inside, the buildings of the base looked like a crystal ball. The base covered an area of 10,000 acres and was considered huge. Even on Earth, the base on the moon could be seen with a telescope. Everyone left the aircraft in protective suits. The overly low gravity made them uncomfortable. With a light jump, they could jump more than 10 meters high and then slowly land. Their strides were very long, and they could propel themselves forward with just a light tap of their toes. It was very easy to lose their center of gravity while walking. Fortunately, the aircraft was very close to the base. A rope was pulled out, and people could hold on to it to move forward. The two astronauts looked at the line of people and found the lady in the red protective suit. They wanted to see if she could still perform as miraculously as she did on the moon. Previously in space, they felt that the other party was the experienced astronaut and that they were rookies. Of course, even the most experienced astronaut couldn't do what she did. At this moment, the two of them saw the figure in the crowd and once again saw a shocking scene. They saw her walking on the surface of the moon at a very steady pace, as if she was walking on Earth. She was flying a kite at the same time. Even though she was holding on to someone, her movements didn't change at all. It looked smooth, natural, and full of beauty. Among a group of people who were walking like babies, she was extremely abrupt and eye-catching. Once again, the two of them wondered if they were really noobs. Calm. Wonderful book house. Chapter 1098. The lunar base was only 10,000 square kilometers, and the living area was even smaller. There were monitoring stations and defense systems in the four corners that were used to destroy meteorites flying toward the moon. There was a hotel on the base that had its own commercial area, gambling, and other entertainment to serve the wealthy who traveled to the moon. There was even a swimming pool. Water was a luxury on the moon. It wasn't easy for ordinary employees to take a bath, let alone swim. Water was far more expensive than food. Food could be sold at 100 times the price on the lunar base. It was a different feeling to spend a lot of money on a bowl of Lanzhou ramen with pickled vegetables while looking at the distant Earth. A bowl of Lanzhou ramen. Expensive. A bowl of ramen on the moon cost 8,888 yuan. The Empress's Mingniu ice cream cost 5,888 yuan, and there were no discounts. Bring her to eat Haagen-Dazs if you love her. Who said that? Isn't it vulgar? Bring her to the moon to eat Mingniu if you love her. It was a completely different story. Ren Boqian deeply understood that the value of a product wasn't only determined by its production, but also by its location, environment, and difficulty in transportation. Leopard. The Empress pushed the chips in front of her to the full range of leopards. You cheated, you definitely cheated. A white man who wasn't far from the Empress shouted loudly. His hair stuck tightly to his scalp. As a famous gambler in Alaska, his demeanor had long been shattered by the Empress. Ren Boqian rolled his eyes. Nonsense. Even a fool would know that the Empress cheated with 28 full-range bets in a row. Then what? Bite me. Ren Boqian then looked at the man who was shouting loudly and seemed to be called Jack. He seemed to have won all his tickets to the moon. Of course, he was also a wealthy man, but he was more proud of his gambling skills. However, he looked like he was going crazy. Ren Boqian responded with a gloating smile. You even dared to flirt with my wife. Have you ever died in your life? Are you arrogant? Are you still going to suppress me? Ren Boqian asked in a frivolous tone. He then looked at the other party's face, which was like a traffic light. The ignorant are fearless. The Empress said in a cold tone. She didn't even look at the other party and didn't care about him at all. However, this kind of behavior made people feel short of breath and have a brain infarction. The dealer broke out in a cold sweat. She was already the fourth dealer to be replaced. However, it was still a full circle every time. The person in charge of the casino had been studying for 20 minutes, but he still couldn't figure out how the Asian woman had cheated. She clearly hadn't touched anything. However, no matter who rolled the dice, no matter how many pairs of dice were changed, no matter how they did it, even if they cheated, they would definitely get a perfect score. It was simply too strange. Now that the gambling chips were in an uproar, all the customers stopped playing and gathered around the dice table to see how many full-range points they could get. That Jack's face was filled with a myriad of emotions. He slammed the table angrily, then stood up and left. A fool wouldn't appear here. Of course, although he had lost quite a bit before, it wasn't a bet, so it wasn't unacceptable for him to lose. The casino lost the most, but no matter how badly they lost, there was nothing they could do. They couldn't play any tricks here. Furthermore, the aircraft that Ren Boqian and the Empress took was also from China, so they couldn't reach out their hands. When the dice were rolled again, there was a burst of exclamation from the crowd. Sure enough, there were 3 identical dice under the cover of the dice bug. Boring, let's go. The Empress stood up with her hands behind her back. The crowd automatically made way for her. Ren Boqian gestured to Ren Xia to let him handle the rest of the transactions. As for whether there would be any trouble, Ren Boqian believed that the new hero would be able to handle it well. Ren Xia looked at uncle and auntie leaving, clicked his tongue, and said, "Auntie's gate is really majestic and imposing." I wonder what kind of person she is. I reckon that there's no hope for Uncle to change his henpecked life. In the eyes of others, the Empress's gait was like that of a real dragon. Every move she made had a unique sense of beauty, and that kind of imposing manner was something that no one else had. Ren Xia had seen many high officials with his father, but none of them gave him the feeling that Auntie was as imposing and natural as her. He had seen so many women, but none of them could compare to Auntie. They couldn't even compare a little bit. When the two of them left the gambling hall, they saw Jack. Even though they left one after the other, it didn't seem like a chance encounter. Instead, Jack was waiting for them. "Oh, do you want a duel?" Ren Bachin stretched out his pinky finger and said, "I can defeat you with this." Jack's face was like a traffic light again. He then said to Ren Bachin, internationally wanted criminal, I know who you are. And then, will anyone come to catch me? Ren Bachin asked calmly. If not for Jack's reminder, he would have forgotten that he was still a wanted criminal. It had been too long, 30 million yuan. I just want to ask you one question. Jack ignored Ren Bachin. He knew that Ren Bachin wasn't an ordinary person. He was an internationally wanted criminal, and he actually appeared here without any obstruction. Furthermore, even though the United States had issued a warrant for his arrest, they didn't take any action afterward. From this point, everyone knew that Ren Bachin wasn't someone that ordinary people could afford to offend. Naturally, no one would come to find trouble with him. Now, he only wanted to ask one question. He really didn't understand why there were 29 all-rounders. He didn't need the other party to tell him how he did it. As long as the other party could express an attitude or even a look, it would be enough for him to prove his conjecture. However, the Empress didn't even look at him and walked past him. This kind of disregard was more unbearable than any other attitude. 50 million yuan. I only have one question. Jack wanted to catch up with her, but he suddenly tripped and fell to the ground. When he got up, the two of them had already entered the elevator. Are you in a good mood? After entering the elevator, Ren Bachin noticed that the Empress had a smile on her face. It's fun. The Empress nodded. After seeing a bunch of people rushing over, she gritted her teeth, but there was nothing she could do. She was shocked. It was only slightly worse than watching TV and catching up on dramas. Come again when there's a chance. Ren Bachin laughed. Okay. The Empress readily agreed. The two of them came to the surface of the base and looked up to see Earth in the distance. What do you think Zhixiao Earth and Star looks like from the moon? The Empress asked curiously. The two of them had already privately named the moon and the planet under their feet. The planet under their feet was Zhixiao Earth and Star, and it was now written into the textbooks. With power, one could be willful. Our aviation industry has just started, but I believe that we will reap some rewards very soon, Ren Bachin said. He had already begun to monitor the world's famous aviation experts. It wouldn't be a problem to kidnap a few dozen of them. He also wanted to know what was going on with that fake moon. Mobile reading, you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.